Silas Crow's voice cut across the Silver Creek platform like a whip. "Look at that," he announced, loud enough for every soul on the platform to hear. Mercer ordered himself a bride and got himself a whole charity case instead. He let the laughter build before he twisted the knife. A woman nobody wanted, dragging around some other man's bastard. Reckon that tells you everything you need to know about what kind of woman answers an advertisement. The little boy gripped his mother's hand tighter. He was 5 years old and already knew the sound of a crowd turning against someone. Evelyn Hart did not flinch. She had crossed 800 miles of railroad track with $43, one worn suitcase, and a child who had already been abandoned by one man. She was not going to be destroyed by a second. But Caleb Mercer said nothing to defend her. He stood 6 feet away and said nothing at all. If you have ever watched someone make a choice they can never take back and had to stand there and witness it, then you already know how this story begins. If you are new here, subscribe now and stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. This is the story of a cowboy who made the worst decision of his life on a train platform in Wyoming and spent the next year learning what it actually cost him. The morning Caleb Mercer drove his wagon to Silver Creek Station, he told himself he was not nervous. He had been ranching the Broken Bow for 11 years, and in that time he had faced 2 hard winters, a drought that nearly finished him, and the death of a horse he had raised from a foal. He was not a man who shook over ordinary things. But the letter in his coat pocket had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases were starting to wear through. Her name was Evelyn Hart. She was 28 years old, born in Indiana, and she had written him 6 letters over 4 months. She described herself as practical rather than pretty, though the photograph she had sent showed a woman with steady eyes and a careful set to her mouth that he found himself studying longer than he intended. She said she was not afraid of hard work. She said she understood that frontier life was not like anything she had known before. She said she was ready. He had written back. He had tried to be honest about what the Broken Bow was: not a fine spread, not a comfortable house, not an easy life. The south pasture was bleeding money. The fences needed replacing. The books were a mess that he had been avoiding for 2 years, because every time he opened them, the numbers made him feel something close to shame. She wrote back and said none of that frightened her. So he had signed the papers with a mail-order agency in Chicago, sent the payment, and driven his wagon to Silver Creek Station on a Tuesday morning in early April, wearing his least-worn shirt and his good boots, feeling like a man walking into a negotiation he had agreed to without fully understanding the terms. The platform was busy. The northbound train was 30 minutes late, which gave the town plenty of time to notice that Caleb Mercer was waiting with his hat in his hand, and to draw their own conclusions. Hattie Doyle, who ran the dry goods store and knew everything about everyone in Silver Creek, whether they wanted her to or not, smiled at him from across the platform and said, "Caleb, you look civilized today, Hattie. Heard you sent for a bride." "Word travels fast. Word here travels at approximately the speed of sound." She tilted her head. "Nervous?" "No." She smiled wider. "You've been holding your hat for 20 minutes. He put his hat back on. The train arrived with its usual noise and steam, and Caleb positioned himself near the end of the platform where he could see each passenger descend without having to push through the crowd. He watched a family with too much luggage. He watched 2 cowboys he recognized from the Crow outfit. He watched an older couple who moved slowly and held on to each other. Then he saw her. She was exactly as the photograph had shown, dark hair pinned back, a sensible gray traveling coat, a worn suitcase in her left hand. She stepped down from the train and looked around the platform with those steady eyes he had memorized from the photograph, and he felt something loosen in his chest that he had not expected. Then he saw what her right hand was holding. A small boy. 5 years old, maybe. Dark-haired like his mother, wearing a coat that was too light for the Wyoming wind. The child looked up at the crowd with enormous eyes and then moved half a step behind his mother's leg. Caleb did not move. Evelyn spotted him across the platform. He did not know how she recognized him. Perhaps from his own photograph. Perhaps simply from the way he was standing completely still while everyone around him moved, and she walked toward him with her chin level and her expression composed and her son's hand held firmly in hers. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Miss Hart." His voice came out flat. He was looking at the boy. "This is Noah." She said it directly, without apology, without explanation, the way you state a fact that cannot be negotiated. "He is my son." The platform was loud with arrivals and conversation and the hiss of the departing train. But the space around Caleb Mercer and Evelyn Hart went very quiet. "You didn't mention a child," Caleb said. "No," she agreed. "I didn't." That single acknowledgement, calm, not defensive, not pleading, made him angrier than an excuse would have. He could have argued with an excuse. He did not know what to do with a woman who simply looked at him and confirmed what he already knew. "I need to speak with you privately," he said. She nodded and guided Noah to a bench near the station wall, crouching down to say something quietly to the boy. Noah sat with his small hands folded in his lap and watched the crowd with the careful attention of a child who has learned that adults sometimes do things that hurt you when you are not paying attention. Caleb walked to the far end of the platform. Evelyn followed. The letters he started. I know what I didn't say. You described yourself, your history, your family. I never once mentioned a son, I know. Her jaw was tight, but her voice stayed level. I made a decision. I knew that if I mentioned Noah, you wouldn't have agreed to the arrangement. You're right, I wouldn't have. So I decided to come anyway and explain in person, because I thought she started again. I thought if you could see him before you made up your mind, it might matter. Caleb looked across the platform at the boy on the bench. Noah had found a loose thread on his coat cuff and was winding it around his finger, not looking at them. He was trying very hard to look like he was not listening. His father, Caleb said, gone 2 years ago. He didn't want the responsibility. The words were clipped, not bitter. She had clearly made peace with the factual version of that story a long time ago. I went back to working. I saved what I could. I answered your advertisement because I wanted a life that was real, not just survival. And I want Noah to grow up somewhere that isn't a boarding house in Indianapolis. That's not my problem to solve. The words came out harder than he intended. He saw her absorb them. No, she said, it's mine. I know that. Silas Crow was not a man who walked past an opportunity to make another man look small. He was 53 years old, owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, and had spent 30 years cultivating a reputation as the man you did not want as an enemy. He was standing 20 feet away on the platform with 2 of his ranch hands, and he had been watching Caleb's exchange with the woman since the moment she descended from the train. He walked over at exactly the wrong moment, Mercer. His voice carried. Didn't realize the mail order service was including extras these days. Several people turned. Crow, Caleb said, a warning, not a greeting. Crow looked at Evelyn the way you look at livestock you are assessing for purchase, taking in the worn coat and the secondhand suitcase and the child on the bench. I heard you sent for a bride. Didn't realize you'd be getting a package deal. He smiled at the crowd beginning to form. A woman with another man's child. That's a generous offer for a rancher in your situation, Mercer. Generous or foolish, Evelyn did not look at Crow. She kept her eyes on Caleb, and there was something in her expression that Caleb could not read, not quite a plea, not quite a challenge. Something in between, like a woman waiting to find out what kind of man was standing in front of her. Caleb felt the crowd around him. He felt the weight of Crow's smirk in the watching eyes of the townspeople and the slow political calculation of what it would mean if Silver Creek's most powerful cattlemen decided to make him the target of a public joke. He made the wrong choice. The arrangement won't be going forward, he said. He said it to Evelyn, not to Crow. But his voice was loud enough for the platform to hear. I agreed to marry you, Miss Hart, not to take on a family that isn't mine. The crowd went still. Noah had stopped winding the thread around his finger. Evelyn's expression did not crumble. That was the thing Caleb would remember later, that she did not crumble. Her eyes went very bright, and her jaw tightened, and she took one slow breath. And then she straightened her spine and said, in a voice that was perfectly steady, I understand. Crow laughed. Well, he said to the crowd rather than to either of them. I suppose that answers the question. No respectable man takes in a woman with another man's bastard, even a desperate one. The word hit the platform like a dropped stone. Evelyn turned and looked at Crow for the first time, and the look she gave him was not the look of a woman who was beaten. It was the look of a woman who was filing information away, cataloging it, deciding what to do with it later. Then she turned back to the bench where her son was sitting. Noah was looking at her. He had heard everything. He was 5 years old, and he had heard every word, and his small face held the particular expression of a child who's deciding whether to cry and has chosen, against everything, not to. Evelyn crossed the platform, sat down beside him, and pulled him into her side without a word. He let her. He pressed his face against her coat. Caleb drove home alone, he told himself, on the 15-mile road back to the Broken Bow, that he had made the only sensible decision. He had agreed to one thing. He had been offered another. He was not obligated to accept terms that had been changed without his knowledge. He had a struggling ranch and no surplus of anything, not money, not time, not energy. Adding a child who was not his to an equation that was already stretched too thin was not wisdom. It was sentiment, and sentiment did not keep cattle alive. He believed this. He almost convinced himself. The Broken Bow looked the same as it always did when he pulled the wagon into the yard, the main house in need of paint. The north fence line sagging where 2 posts had rotted through last November. The barn solid enough, but the roof showing its age. He had built this place with his own hands, and with money he had earned one brutal season at a time, and there was a version of himself that was proud of it. There was also a version of himself that could see clearly that it was slowly losing the argument with time. He unhitched the horse and went inside and heated water for coffee and sat at his kitchen table with the ranch ledgers open in front of him, which was what he always did when he needed to feel like he was dealing with reality, instead of feeling things he did not want to feel. The ledgers were not encouraging. The South Pasture operation had been a mistake from the beginning. He had known it when he started, and done it anyway, because he needed the acreage to justify the cattle numbers. And now he was paying for that gamble in a long, slow bleed. The fencing costs were going to hit him hard in summer. The water situation on the eastern boundary was something he had been not thinking about for 2 years, because thinking about it required engaging with the possibility that Silas Crow had been quietly maneuvering against him in ways he could not yet prove. He closed the ledgers. He did not sleep well that night, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that, when he woke at 3 a.m. with the ranch problems cycling through his head in their familiar loop, he found an additional image interrupting the rotation: a 5-year-old boy on a platform bench, winding a thread around his finger and pretending not to listen. He pushed it away. Over the next 3 days, Silver Creek told him what it knew about Evelyn Hart and her son. Not directly. Nobody in Silver Creek said anything directly if there was an alternative. But Hattie Doyle mentioned, while he was buying nails, that the Hart woman had taken a room above the feed store, the cheap one, with the window that didn't close right, and that the boy was quiet and well-behaved, and had spent the first morning sitting on the front step watching the street with his serious eyes. Frank Aldridge at the livery told him that the woman had asked about laundry work and had been turned down by 2 households before Mabel Torres took her on for 3 mornings a week. Dr. Emmett, who was old enough to say whatever he thought without social consequence, stopped Caleb on Main Street and told him directly that he thought Caleb had behaved poorly. "She's a decent woman," Emmett said. The boy, too. "You could see it. It's not that simple," Caleb said. "Most of the hard things in life look complicated from the outside," the doctor said, and obvious from 100 yards back. Caleb walked away, but on the 4th morning, he found himself driving past the feed store on his way to the mill without any clear explanation for why he had chosen that particular route. He did not stop. But he saw Evelyn Hart through the window. She was at a table with a ledger that appeared to belong to the feed store owner, her head bent over columns of numbers, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, working. That caught his attention. He told himself it was professional curiosity and drove on. It was on the 6th day that things became unavoidable. He had ridden out to check the eastern fence line, the section nearest the creek, the section he had been not thinking about, and found it worse than he had imagined. 2 posts down, the wire sagging into the creek in 2 places, and along the bank, evidence that Crow's cattle had been crossing onto his property with enough regularity that the grass was worn down in distinct trails. This was not accidental. He was still crouched at the bank, reading the ground with the attention of a man who has spent 30 years learning what land tells you if you listen. When he heard hoofbeats, he looked up. It was Evelyn Hart. She was on a bay horse he recognized from Frank Aldridge's livery. She must have arranged the loan or the rental somehow, and she pulled up at the fence line and looked at the situation with the same calm, analytical attention he had noticed at the train station. "You're losing about 40 feet of eastern bank," she said, without preamble. He stood. "What are you doing on my property?" "I'm on the fence line." "Not quite on your property." She looked at the creek. "Crow's cattle have been crossing here for weeks. You can see the pattern in the bank erosion. That's not this month. That's been happening since at least last fall." Caleb looked at her. "You've been studying my ranch. I've been riding," she said. "People look at things when they ride, Miss Hart." "I don't have a position to argue from," she said, cutting him off, her voice matter-of-fact rather than angry. "I know that. You made your decision, and I'm not here to change it. But I've been watching this ranch for 6 days, and I've identified 3 problems that will be serious within 60 days if they're not addressed, and it seemed wasteful not to say so." He looked at her for a long moment. The wind was cold off the creek, and she sat her borrowed horse without fidgeting, waiting him out. "What problems?" he said finally. She told him. She had clearly been doing more than just riding. She spoke about the South Pasture water distribution, with the kind of specific knowledge that meant she had walked the lines. She talked about the cattle-to-acreage ratio and the pressure it was putting on his eastern grazing, which was why Crow's incursions were particularly damaging. She had actually done the math on carrying capacity versus current herd numbers, and the numbers were not comfortable. She talked about the ledger, which she had apparently extrapolated from what she could see of ranch operations and county assessment records that were public information. He had not asked her to do any of this. She had done it anyway. "Why?" he said when she had finished. "Because I needed something to occupy my mind." She looked at the creek. "And because if you lose this ranch to Crow, he gets stronger. and there are 7 other operations in this county that can't afford for Crow to get stronger. That's a generous explanation. It's the true one. He rode back with her as far as the road, not because he had decided anything, but because the creek situation was on his route anyway, and it would have been strange to deliberately ride in the opposite direction. They did not speak much. When they reached the road fork, she turned toward town. "Noah," he said. Before he could stop himself, she looked back. "Is he all right?" Something moved across her face. It was not quite the response he expected. It was too complicated for gratitude and too careful for bitterness. "He's learning to be," she said. "He's good at that." She rode on. That evening, Caleb opened the ledgers again and looked at them with the framework Evelyn had provided, and found that she was right about every number. She had identified the South Pasture problem with precision. She had correctly assessed the carrying capacity issue. She had even noted, somehow, that his arrangement with the neighboring Miller property for water access during dry months was based on a verbal agreement that had never been documented, which meant that if Miller sold, or died, or simply changed his mind, Caleb had nothing in writing to protect him. He sat at the table for a long time. Then he took out a piece of paper and wrote a note, and the next morning he had Tommy Briggs from the neighboring property deliver it to the feed store. The note said, "I would be willing to discuss a working arrangement. If you are interested, come to the ranch Tuesday morning." He almost did not send it. He sent it. Evelyn arrived Tuesday morning at 7:15, which was exactly when he had said, and she arrived with Noah because there was no one else to leave him with. The boy was in the wagon seat beside his mother, wearing his too-light coat and his serious expression, and he looked at Caleb with the careful, measuring gaze of a child who has learned that adults need to be evaluated before you commit to anything. Caleb helped Evelyn down from the wagon without thinking about it, just because it was what you did, and then he looked at Noah, who was still sitting in the wagon seat, and said, "Can you climb down?" Noah looked at him for a moment. Then he climbed down himself carefully, without help. "All right," the boy said. Inside, at the kitchen table, Evelyn laid out a recovery plan for the broken bow that was more thorough than anything Caleb had produced in 3 years of staring at the same problems. She had sketched it out on 3 sheets of paper: water rotation schedule, fence priority sequence, cattle redistribution across the pastures, revised projections if the South Pasture operation was scaled back by 30%. She pushed the papers across the table. "This isn't an argument," she said. "I'm not asking for anything except the chance to work. Room and board for Noah and me, and a fair wage when things improve. That's all." Caleb looked at the papers. Then he looked at the window, where through the glass he could see Noah sitting on the porch step, having apparently found a stick of some interest in the yard, poking at the dirt with it. "He's 5 years old," Caleb said, though he was not sure what point he was making. "He'll be 6 in August," Evelyn said. "He won't be in your way. He doesn't know how to be in the way, his father." She stopped. "He learned very young to make himself small." The way she said it, not as an accusation, not as a bid for sympathy, simply as information about a child's history, was the thing that hit Caleb somewhere he had not expected. He looked out the window again at the boy and his stick. "Tuesday through Saturday," he said. "Books, water schedule. I'll take your recommendations on the South Pasture. Room in the back of the house, it's small. Wage to be settled when I see what the books look like at the end of summer." He was not looking at her when he said it. "All right," she said. It was the same thing Noah had said, climbing down from the wagon. Caleb noticed that. What happened in the following 3 weeks was not comfortable, but it was not what Caleb had feared either. Evelyn worked with the focused efficiency of someone who has never had the luxury of wasting motion. She was in the ledgers before 7 every morning and made the changes she had proposed to the water rotation without requiring direction. She was not warm with him, not cold either, just professional, just precise, doing the work she had said she would do. Noah was quiet. That was the thing Caleb had not anticipated, not the fact of the child's presence, but the quality of it. He had expected noise or mess, or the disruptive energy that children were supposed to have. Instead, Noah moved through the ranch with a kind of careful observation, watching how things worked, staying out of the way unless someone spoke to him directly, occasionally appearing at the edge of whatever Caleb was doing and watching with those enormous dark eyes and not asking questions unless he had been in the same spot for long enough that a question seemed warranted. It was Caleb on the 9th day who broke first. He was repairing the north fence, and Noah had been sitting on the fence post watching for 20 minutes, and the sense was starting to feel less like a child being obedient, and more like a child with something he wanted to say. "You can ask," Caleb said, without turning from the wire. Silence. "Then how do you know which wire to use?" Caleb explained. Noah listened with the attention of someone twice his age, head slightly tilted, taking it in. "Can I hold that?" Noah pointed to the wire tensioner. "It's heavy. I'm stronger than I look." Caleb looked at him. The boy was not boasting. He was stating it matter-of-factly the way his mother stated facts. Here is the information. Take it or leave it. Caleb handed him the tensioner. Noah held it with both hands very carefully and did not drop it. You're right, Caleb said. You are. Noah handed it back with a very small, very controlled satisfaction that was somehow more moving than open pride would have been. Caleb was not ready to examine what that meant. 2 weeks later, Evelyn found the water claim. She came to him in the evening, after Noah was asleep, with a county document in her hand, and an expression that was not alarm exactly, but was the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they suspected. Crow filed this 3 months ago, she said, and set the document on the table. Caleb looked at it. It was a competing claim on the creek water rights, on his eastern boundary, the same boundary where Crow's cattle had been crossing, the same section he had been not thinking about, the same water without which his cattle operation was not viable. This is based on prior use doctrine, Evelyn said. He's claiming his cattle have had consistent access to that water for longer than your documented claim. If it holds, you lose the water. Caleb stared at the document. Does it hold? He said. No, she said, not if you have your original survey documentation. The original survey would establish your prior claim date, and it predates anything Crow could argue. She paused. Do you have the survey? He thought. He remembered signing papers 11 years ago. He remembered a survey. He did not remember what had happened to the paperwork. It might be in Cheyenne, he said slowly, with the land office. Then someone needs to go to Cheyenne, she said. She said it like it was simple, like it was just a matter of deciding. Caleb sat across the table and felt the familiar weight of every problem bearing down simultaneously: the fences, the pasture, the cattle that needed watching, Crow's men who had been riding the boundary with increasing frequency over the past week, the simple fact that he could not leave the Broken Bow right now without risking the operation he had spent 11 years building. I can't go, he said. Evelyn looked at him. I know, she said. And in her voice, in those 2 careful words, he heard the shape of what she was about to offer, and felt something he could not name move through his chest like weather, moving through open country, cold and large and impossible to stop. They had not resolved the water rights. They had not resolved Crow. They had barely managed a civil working relationship across the kitchen table of a ranch that was still bleeding money and still threatened from 3 directions. But Evelyn Hart had just looked at an impossible problem and said, I know. And in that moment, Caleb Mercer understood for the first time that the woman he had turned away on the train platform was not the kind of woman who needed rescuing. She was the kind of woman who walked toward the thing that needed doing and figured out the rest on the way. He just did not know yet what it was going to cost either of them to find out if that was enough. She said it quietly, across a kitchen table in the middle of the night, with a county document between them and 11 years of someone else's work on the line. I know. And Caleb Mercer heard in those 2 words the particular sound of a person who has already made a decision and is simply giving you time to catch up. He did not ask her directly. He did not say the words. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the water claim document and thought about distances and timing and what Crow's men had been doing on that eastern boundary. And after a long moment, he said, the road to Cheyenne is 2 days each way. If someone left before first light, they could reach the land office by Thursday morning. Yes, Evelyn said. Crow's lawyer filed a response deadline of the 15th. That's 10 days. It's enough time, he said. Barely. It's enough, she said. They were not looking at each other. They were both looking at the document, and the lamp between them was burning low, and somewhere in the back of the house Noah was asleep, with the particular completeness of a child who trusts that the world will still be there in the morning. A trust. Caleb was beginning to understand that the boy extended in defiance of considerable evidence to the contrary. I can't leave the cattle, Caleb said. Crow's men have been on the eastern line every 3rd day. If I'm gone for 4 days and they push through. I know you can't go, Evelyn said. She said it without impatience, without frustration, the way you state a fact that is simply part of the equation. I wasn't waiting for you to offer. He looked at her then. Her expression was the same one she had worn on the train platform, not defiant exactly, not performing courage, just settled, like someone who has considered the risks and accepted them as the cost of what matters. Crow will know you're going, Caleb said. He has eyes in this county. You know that. Then I'll leave before anyone is watching. His men. I am aware of what his men are capable of. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, not fear, but the careful management of fear, which is a different thing entirely. I've been aware of it since the day I arrived, and he stood on that platform and decided I was useful to him as a way to diminish you. She folded the document with precise movements and set it aside. I'm not going to let that man decide what I'm willing to do. Caleb was quiet. Noah stays here, she said. It was not a question. He understood in the silence that followed that this was the real ask. Not the ride to Cheyenne, not the risk of Crow's men on the road. She was asking him to be responsible for her son. For 4 days, the same son he had publicly refused on a train platform 3 weeks ago. The same child he had kept at careful professional distance since Evelyn had arrived at the ranch. She was asking him to look after the one thing in the world that mattered to her more than the broken bow, more than the water rights, more than her own safety on a 2-day road in early Wyoming spring. Yes, he said. The word came out before he had fully decided to say it. Evelyn nodded once and stood and picked up the lamp. I'll leave at 4, she said. I'll be back by Sunday. She went to bed and Caleb sat at the table in the dark for a long time, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, which was a long list, and about the fact that he had just agreed to all of it anyway, which told him something about himself that he was not entirely comfortable knowing. She was gone when he woke at 5:30. He had not heard her leave. The horse was gone from the barn in the bay, the same one she had been borrowing from Aldridge's livery, though Caleb had quietly settled that account 2 weeks ago without mentioning it to her, and the kitchen showed evidence that she had been up before him. Coffee water heated, a tin cup set out, a small folded note on the table. He unfolded it. It said, Noah likes porridge with a little salt. Not sweet. He will not ask for things you have to offer. If he gets quiet, he is not sulking, he is thinking. He is fine with quiet. So are you. That last sentence stopped him. He read it twice. Then he put the note in his coat pocket, which was not a decision exactly, more of a reflex, and he poured his coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the yard, where the morning light was coming in thin and cold over the eastern ridge, and he thought, not for the first time, that Evelyn Hart saw things about people that they had not offered to show her. Noah was up by 6. He came into the kitchen in his socks, hair still flattened from sleep, carrying his boots in one hand. He stopped when he saw Caleb at the table and looked around the kitchen the way a person checks a room when someone they were expecting is not in it. She left early, Caleb said. Noah looked at him. She'll be back Sunday. The boy sat down and began putting on his boots. He did not ask where she had gone. He did not ask if she was coming back. He simply put on his boots with the focus of someone for whom the immediate task is the only manageable portion of a large and uncertain world. Porridge? Caleb said. Noah looked up. I don't need. I'm making some anyway. You want it or not? A pause. Yes, thank you. Caleb made porridge. He added salt, not sugar, and he set the bowl in front of the boy without ceremony and sat across from him with his coffee, and they ate in a silence that was not particularly comfortable, but was not hostile either. It was simply two people who did not know each other well, eating breakfast, with the sounds of the ranch morning coming through the walls. You have chores? Noah said when he had finished. Plenty. Can I help? Caleb looked at him. The boy was 5, nearly 6, he corrected himself, and small for his age, and his hands around the bowl were the hands of a child who had not done much ranch work. But there was in his posture the same thing that had been there when he climbed down from the wagon and said, all right, a readiness, an absence of complaint, a willingness that was not enthusiasm exactly, but something quieter and more durable than enthusiasm. You can come along, Caleb said. We'll see what's useful. What followed was one of the stranger days Caleb Mercer had spent on his own ranch. Noah was not helpful in any conventional sense. He could not lift much. He could not work the wire tensioner for real. He was too small for the fence post work and too inexperienced for anything involving the cattle directly. But he followed Caleb from task to task with careful attention, and when Caleb explained what he was doing not for the boy's benefit initially, just because the silence was starting to feel like something that needed filling, Noah listened with an intensity that was slightly unnerving. Why does that post need to go deeper? Noah asked, watching Caleb dig. Frost heave. Ground freezes in winter and pushes things up. Deeper post holds better. Oh, a beat. Is that why the north fence has been having problems? Because those posts aren't deep enough? Caleb stopped digging and looked at him. What do you know about the north fence? Mama was talking about it. She said whoever put them in originally probably did it in summer when the ground was hard and dry and didn't account for what happens when it gets wet. Noah paused. Is that right? That's exactly right. The boy nodded like this confirmed something. He was quiet for a while and then said, She talks about the ranch when she thinks I'm asleep. She thinks if she talks quiet enough I can't hear. Can you hear? Most of it. He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. She worries about you losing the water. She says if that happens, the cattle can't sustain on what's left, and the whole eastern operation folds. He looked up. What does fold mean? Like the operation gives up? Something like that. That would be bad. Yes. Is the man trying to take the water the same one who said that word on the train platform? Caleb kept his hands on the post digger and did not let his expression change. Crow, yes. Noah put the stone down. Why does he get to do that? Because he has money and lawyers, and he's been doing it long enough that people have stopped questioning it. The boy thought about this. My mama says that the only way to beat someone like that is to have better paper than they do. She's probably right. She usually is, Noah said, without any particular pride, just the factual assessment of someone who has been observing a subject long enough to have formed a reliable opinion. They worked until noon. Caleb caught himself twice, adjusting his pace unconsciously to account for the shorter legs keeping up beside him, and each time he noticed it, he felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest, the recognition that accommodation had become automatic. He did not know what to do with that. In the afternoon, while Caleb was working on the barn roof, a job Noah could not help with, and had accepted this verdict with the same equanimity he seemed to apply. To most situations, the boy sat on an overturned bucket in the yard and occupied himself with the dirt and a collection of small sticks he had assembled into some kind of arrangement Caleb could not interpret from the roof. At one point, Caleb climbed down to move the ladder and passed close enough to see what Noah was building. It was a fence, a small meticulous fence, constructed from sticks pressed into the dirt, with a gate that actually swung on a tiny hinge made from a bent piece of wire the boy had found somewhere. Caleb stood and looked at it for a long moment. "Where'd you get the wire?" he asked. "The pile by the barn. The small bent pieces. I didn't take the good wire." "No," Caleb said, "you didn't. The gate swung on its tiny hinge." "Do you want me to put it back?" Noah asked, watching him. "No," Caleb said. "Leave it." He went back up the ladder and did not examine the feeling that had taken up residence somewhere in his ribcage with any more attention than strictly necessary. The first 2 days passed without event, which Caleb found more worrying than if something had happened. Crow's men had been visible on the eastern boundary on Monday and Tuesday, 2 riders, not doing anything actionable, just present, just visible, which was its own kind of message. Wednesday they were not there. Thursday they were not there either. He did not like that. On Thursday evening, after Noah was in bed, Caleb rode the eastern fence line alone in the dark, checking every section, looking for evidence of recent crossing. He found it at the south end of the creek section, fresh tracks. Cattle, at least 8 head, pushed through in the last 24 hours. Crow's brand on his land. He mended the fence in the dark with a lantern hung from the wire, which was slow work and cold work. And he thought about Evelyn on the Cheyenne Road, and about the water claim document, and about the 11 years he had spent building something that a man like Crow could apparently dismantle piece by piece without anyone stopping him. And he felt the particular anger of a person who has been patient for too long. He rode back in the early morning hours and found Noah standing on the porch in his nightclothes, which was alarming enough that Caleb pulled up short. "What are you doing up? I heard you leave." The boy's voice was matter-of-fact. "I wanted to know if something was wrong. Something is always wrong on a ranch. Go back to bed." Noah did not move immediately. He was looking at Caleb with those careful eyes. "Is my mama going to be all right?" The question was asked quietly, not with the performance of a child seeking reassurance, but with the genuine, direct inquiry of someone who wants an actual answer. Caleb dismounted and led the horse to the hitching post, and then stood in front of the boy and told him the truth, which was something he had not planned to do. "I don't know," he said, "but your mother is the most capable person I have met in a very long time, and she knows the risks, and she went anyway. That means she decided the stakes were worth it." He paused. "She's fighting for something that matters to her." "The water rights," Noah said. "The water rights," Caleb agreed. "And other things." Noah thought about this. Then she said she does that. When something matters, she just goes. He pulled his nightshirt tighter against the cold. "When my father left, she didn't stop for very long. She cried for one night, and then the next morning she got up and started working out what to do next." He looked out at the dark yard. "I heard her that night. She thought I was asleep." Caleb stood very still. "She does everything so that I won't be scared," Noah said. Not complaining, not looking for sympathy, just explaining. The way he explained things. It's like someone who has thought about a subject enough to have arrived at something close to peace with it. Sometimes I am anyway, but I try not to let her see. Why? Because she already has enough to worry about. Caleb looked at this 5-year-old boy standing on a cold porch in Wyoming in the middle of the night, managing his own fear so that his mother would not have to manage it for him, and felt something crack open in the vicinity of his chest that he had been keeping locked for a long time. "Go to bed," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Okay." Noah turned toward the door and then stopped. "Mr. Mercer?" "What? Thank you for letting us stay." He went inside. Caleb stood on the porch in the dark for a long time. Friday brought complications. Walt Sims, who worked the small claim east of Silver Creek and was loosely allied with Crow's operation in the way that small operators sometimes latched onto powerful ones out of proximity rather than loyalty, showed up at the ranch gate in the mid-morning with a look on his face that Caleb recognized as the look of a man who has been sent to do something he is not entirely comfortable with. "Caleb," Sims said. "Heard that woman went to Cheyenne. Did you? Word gets around, he fidgeted with his reins. Crow's sent a letter to the land office. Copy of a prior use affidavit, signed by 3 of Crow's hands, saying they've been watering cattle at your creek for 12 years. Says it predates your documented claim. Caleb kept his expression flat. That's a lie, well. Sims looked at the gatepost. Crow's got 3 signatures on paper. What have you got? The original survey, if she can get it certified before the deadline. Sims finally looked at him directly. Crow figures she won't make it back in time. He's got his lawyer at the land office already arrived yesterday. He's going to argue the original survey was improperly filed. He paused. I'm not supposed to tell you that. Then why are you? Sims was quiet for a moment. Because my father homesteaded this county same as yours did, and because what Crow is doing has gone on long enough that some of us are getting tired of pretending we don't see it. He pulled his horse around. That's all I came to say. He rode away. Caleb stood at the gate for a moment, then went inside and looked at the calendar. Evelyn was due back Sunday. The deadline was the 15th. If Crow's lawyer was already at the land office and had arrived yesterday, he went to Noah, who was in the side yard attempting to teach himself to sharpen a stick with a small knife he had apparently borrowed from the kitchen, a project that was going more or less adequately. I need to send a wire to Cheyenne, Caleb said. I need to ride to town. You're coming with me. Noah looked up. Is something wrong? Crow moved faster than I expected. We need to warn your mother. Noah stood immediately, putting the knife and stick aside with no complaint about the interrupted project. How fast do we need to go? Fairly fast. I can ride, Noah said. I'm not as good as Mama, but I can ride. Caleb looked at him. You'll ride with me. Faster that way. Noah nodded, accepting this without argument, and went to get his coat. They reached Silver Creek in 40 minutes, which was faster than Caleb usually pushed on that road, and Noah rode in front of him on the saddle, with his small hands gripping the horn and his back straight, and did not complain once about the pace or the cold. At the telegraph office, Caleb sent a message to the Cheyenne land office in care of Evelyn Hart. Crow lawyer arrived yesterday, stop. Prior use affidavit, 3 signatures, stop, must certify and secure survey before filing, stop. Be careful, stop. He paused over the last part, then he sent it anyway. The clerk looked at him over the counter. Who's the woman in Cheyenne? None of your business, Peterson. Peterson smiled in a way that suggested he would be sharing this information with Hattie Doyle within the hour. There was nothing to be done about that. On the way out, Noah pulled on Caleb's sleeve. Mr. Mercer, that man. Caleb followed the boy's gaze across the street. 2 of Crow's ranch hands, Burke and the younger one, whose name Caleb did not know, were standing outside the saloon. Not doing anything, just watching. I see them, Caleb said. They were on the east road this morning, before you were up. I saw them from my window. Caleb looked down at him. You saw them and you didn't tell me? I didn't know if it meant something. Now I think it might have. Noah's face was serious. I'm sorry, I should have said. Next time you see something like that, you tell me right away. Yes, sir. They rode home under a gray sky that was gathering something, snow or rain, and Caleb thought about Evelyn on the Cheyenne Road, 2 days of hard riding, carrying the weight of everything that depended on a piece of paper in a government office, and he thought about Crow's lawyer arriving a day early, and he thought about 3 forged signatures on a prior use affidavit, and the anger he had felt on Thursday night came back and settled into something colder and more deliberate. Saturday was long. Caleb worked the ranch with the focused energy of a man who needs the work to keep himself from doing something rash, which was a mode he recognized in himself and had learned to manage over many years. He repaired the south fence section. He moved 60 head to the upper pasture where the water access was uncontested. He documented, in writing, every instance of Crow cattle crossing onto his land for the past 3 weeks, including the Thursday night incursion, drawing from memory and from the notes he had kept since Evelyn had first pointed out the scope of what was happening. Noah worked beside him through the morning, or rather near him, doing what he could and staying out of the way when he couldn't, which turned out to be a more valuable quality than Caleb had expected. At noon, the boy produced a wrapped cloth from somewhere that turned out to contain biscuits and dried beef that he had apparently prepared before they left the house that morning. Caleb looked at the cloth. When did you make these? While you were doing the morning water check. Noah held out the cloth with both hands. Mama taught me. I'm not as good as her, but they're not bad. Caleb took a biscuit. It was slightly uneven and baked a shade too dark on the bottom, and it was fine. He ate it without comment and took another. They sat on the fence rail in the cold noon light, eating biscuits and dried beef, and Noah swung his legs against the fence posts with a small, contained energy that was the most childlike thing Caleb had seen from him in 2 weeks. Mr. Mercer, Noah said. What, do you think she got the telegram? Probably. Cheyenne's office is reliable. But do you think she'll get to the paper before that lawyer does? Your mother, Caleb said, Has a talent for getting to things before other people think she will. Noah considered this. That's true. He ate the rest of his biscuit. She got to me before my father decided to leave. She knew it was going to happen, and she made sure I had what I needed first. He said this without apparent sadness as a statement of fact about a tactical decision his mother had made. She's good at seeing ahead. Caleb looked at him. She was making sure I'd be all right, Noah said, in case something happened to her too. He looked at the horizon. I don't think she's planned for you to be part of that, but I think maybe you are now. The directness of children, Caleb thought, was either the most useful thing in the world or the most devastating, depending on the day. Eat your lunch, he said. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold with a wind off the northern range that cut through every layer. Caleb was at the eastern fence line before 7, checking the creek section, and he heard the horse before he saw her the bay's particular gait, the sound of a rider pushing toward home rather than arriving leisurely. Evelyn came around the bend of the road looking like she had not slept for 2 days, which she probably had not. Coat was dirty. Her hair was escaping every pin, and she was sitting the horse with the concentrated focus of someone running on will rather than energy. She pulled up when she saw him. For a moment they just looked at each other. Did you get the telegram, he said. Yesterday morning. I was already at the land office. She reached into her coat and produced a document, folded twice. Certified copy of the original survey. Filed and stamped before Crow's lawyer could contest it. She held it out. The prior date on your claim is 1871. Crow's earliest documented presence on the eastern range is 1875. His affidavit is worthless. Caleb took the document. He unfolded it and looked at the stamp and the date and the registrar's signature. His lawyer threatened me, she said. She said it the way she said most things directly, without drama. He told me if I submitted the survey, he would have my father's debts surfaced through the county court. Old debts before my father died. He said he would make sure every bank in Wyoming knew that I was a woman of questionable financial history, and that Noah, she stopped. What did he say about Noah? He said he would make sure it was known that I had an illegitimate child, and that any respectable rancher who associated himself with me was associating himself with that. Her jaw was tight. He was very clear about it. He wanted me to understand that the price of submitting that survey was my reputation in this county and whatever future I might still be trying to build. The wind moved between them. What did you say? Caleb asked. Evelyn looked at him steadily. I told him that my son's existence was not a bargaining chip, and I submitted the survey. Caleb folded the document and put it inside his coat. Come to the house, he said. You need to eat and sleep. Noah is fine, better than fine. He turned his horse. He made biscuits yesterday. They were decent. He heard behind him a sound he had not heard from her before, a short, exhausted, genuine laugh. He's been working on that, she said. It showed, Caleb said. Come on. Noah was on the porch when they rode into the yard, and when he saw his mother, he descended the steps at a speed that was the fastest Caleb had seen the boy move, and Evelyn swung down from the horse and caught him and held on. She pressed her face into his hair, and her shoulders dropped with the particular release of a person who has been holding tension for 4 days and has finally set it down. Noah's arms went around her neck, and he held tight and did not say anything, and she did not say anything either, and they stayed like that for a long moment while Caleb led the horses to the barn without looking back. Inside the barn, he unsaddled the bay and checked her over. She had been ridden hard but was sound, and he stood in the quiet with his hand on the horse's flank and looked at the certified survey document he had taken from his coat and unfolded again. Prior claim date, March 14, 1871. 11 years of work, documented and stamped. He refolded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat, which was where he kept the things he did not want to risk losing. When he came back to the house, Evelyn was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and Noah was sitting across from her, and they were talking quietly not about the survey, not about Crow, but about the fence Noah had been constructing in the side yard from sticks, which he was apparently explaining in detail. Evelyn was listening with the focused attention of someone who finds the subject genuinely interesting. Caleb stopped in the doorway. He looked at the two of them at his kitchen table, the tired woman and the serious boy and the coffee going cold while they talked about a stick fence, and he felt something that he did not have a name for, which was unusual because he was a man who had generally preferred to name things. It was not comfortable, but it was not something he wanted to look away from either. The water claim could be contested. Crow would find another angle, he always did. The south pasture was still bleeding. The fences still needed work. The arrangement at the Broken Bow was still, technically, a professional one, room and board, a fair wage when the accounts improved. 2 people and a child living in careful proximity around a kitchen table and a shared problem. That was all it was, technically. But Evelyn had ridden 2 days to Cheyenne and back to protect a piece of paper that carried his name, and she had refused a threat against her son's reputation without hesitating for a single moment, and the boy had stood on a porch in the dark, asking whether she would be all right, and had made biscuits the next morning, as if keeping himself occupied was the bravest thing he knew how to do. And Caleb Mercer had spent 4 days on a ranch with a 5-year-old boy, and somewhere between the fence post explanation and the lunch on the fence rail and the midnight porch conversation about fear, he had stopped thinking of Noah as a complication. He did not examine that realization directly. He was not ready for that yet. He went to the stove and checked the coffee and found it still warm enough, and he poured himself a cup, and he sat down at the table not across from them, but at the end, the practical position, the position of a man who is simply part of the room, and Noah looked up from his fence description and said, "She likes it," meaning the stick fence, meaning Evelyn, and Evelyn looked up and met Caleb's eyes briefly across the table. She did not say anything. Neither did he. But she did not look away, and neither did he. And the kitchen was warm enough, and outside the gray sky was finally deciding to snow, and the broken bow sat on its eastern ridge, with the certified survey locked in the rancher's coat pocket, and the water rights intact for now. And the problems ahead were substantial, and Crow was not finished, and nothing was resolved except the one thing that needed to be resolved by Thursday. Noah had gone back to describing the gate mechanism, the bent wire hinge, the way it swung, and his mother was listening. And the snow was starting to come down, and Caleb Mercer sat at the end of his own kitchen table and thought that the most dangerous thing that had happened in the last 4 days was not Crow's lawyer, or the forged affidavit, or the riders on the eastern boundary. The most dangerous thing was that the broken bow had started to feel, in some way he could not defend or explain, like a place where more than one person lived. He was not sure when that had happened. He suspected it had started with a stick fence and a bent piece of wire, and a 5-year-old boy who had decided, without being asked, that the gate should actually swing. The snow that had started Sunday evening was gone by Monday morning, leaving the ground wet and the air sharp and the eastern fence line shining with melt where the wire caught the low sun. Caleb was out before first light, as he always was, and he was aware more than he wanted to be that the sound of movement in the kitchen behind him meant Evelyn was up too, and that the particular domestic geometry of 2 people starting a day in the same house had shifted in the past 4 days from something he was accommodating to something that had simply become the shape of mornings at the broken bow. He did not examine that directly. He had other things to examine. The certified survey was in the strong box under his bed, which was where he kept important documents and a small amount of cash, and the deed to the property, the things whose loss would be unrecoverable. He had put it there Sunday night after Evelyn and Noah were asleep, and he had stood over the strongbox for a moment before locking it, thinking about what it had cost her to obtain that piece of paper and what it had cost her to refuse the threat that came with it. He locked the box and went to bed, and did not sleep particularly well, which was becoming a pattern. Monday brought a visitor he had not expected. Ramon Vasquez ran a modest cattle operation 12 miles south of Silver Creek, on land his family had held for 2 generations before Wyoming was a territory. He was 51 years old, weathered in the way that men who work land get weathered, not broken by it, but compressed, like wood under long pressure, denser and harder than it started. He and Caleb had a cordial relationship built on the occasional shared fence line repair, and the mutual understanding that Crow's expansion had been bad for both of them. He arrived at the gate mid-morning on a horse that needed rest, and looked at Caleb with an expression that was somewhere between grim and relieved. "Heard your woman got the survey certified," he said, by way of greeting. "Where'd you hear that, Cheyenne?" "I've got a cousin at the land office." He swung down. Crow's lawyer filed a protest the same afternoon. Claims the certification process was irregular. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. On what basis? He's arguing the registrar didn't follow proper procedure. It won't hold. Procedure was followed. My cousin confirmed it, but it's going to trigger a hearing. Territorial level, not county. Ramon tied his horse to the post and looked at the ranch with the appraising eye of a man who has spent a lifetime reading what land and operations tell you. That means Laramie. That means a judge who answers to the territorial governor. And that means Crow will have every lawyer he can afford in that room. Caleb was quiet for a moment. When 6 weeks, maybe 8? Ramon looked at him directly. I came because I want to testify. That was not what Caleb had expected. You don't have a stake in my water claim, he said. No. But I have a stake in what Crow is doing to this county. Ramon's voice was even, but there was something hard underneath it that had clearly been building for a while. 3 years ago, he contested my eastern pasture access. I settled because I couldn't afford a fight. 2 years ago, he bought out the Hendricks family forced sale, though they'll tell you it was voluntary if you ask them now, because their son still works for him, and they can't afford to say otherwise. Last year he poisoned my north well, he said it flatly. I can't prove it. I know it was him. My cattle got sick. I lost 11 head. And the man who was supposed to test the water works for the county assessor's office. And the county assessor's office takes its unofficial direction from Silas Crow. Evelyn had come out of the house while Ramon was talking. She stood on the porch with her coffee and did not interrupt. But she was listening, with the focused attention Caleb had learned, meant she was cataloging everything. Come in, Caleb said to Ramon. Tell us what you know. What Ramon knew was considerable, and what it added up to was worse than Caleb had pieced together on his own. At the kitchen table, over coffee, Ramon laid out a pattern that went back at least 7 years. Contested water claims. Manufactured debts through a lending operation Crow controlled through a cousin in Laramie. Cattle losses on properties adjacent to Crow's range that were consistently attributed to disease or weather, but followed a pattern. They happened when operators were most vulnerable, when they had overextended or faced a hard season, when the cost of the loss was enough to force a conversation about selling. He doesn't rush, Ramon said. That's the part people miss. He picks a target, and he weakens it slowly, and then when the moment is right, he makes an offer that the owner can barely refuse. And the offer is always just enough that the owner can tell themselves it was a business decision. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. My neighbor Hector Reyes sold 18 months ago. He'll say it was his choice. But I know what happened to his cattle the spring before, and I know who held his notes, and I know what Crow paid versus what that land was worth. Reyes, Evelyn said. He's in Silver Creek now? Has a small place east of town. Works part-time at the mill. Ramon looked at her. Why? Because if he has records, anything from when he operated purchase records, veterinary bills, correspondence with the lending operation, that's evidence of a pattern. She looked at Caleb. Not just your water claim. The whole scheme. You're talking about building a case that goes beyond the hearing, Caleb said. I'm talking about making sure that even if Crow's lawyers find a way to muddy the water at the hearing, there's something larger that can't be dismissed. She set her coffee down. One water claim is a dispute between neighbors. 7 years of systematic fraud against multiple operations is a criminal matter. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Ramon looked at Evelyn with an expression Caleb recognized, the same expression he had seen on his own face, in the eastern fence line reflection in the creek water, the day she had first laid out the ranch's problems with more precision than he had managed in 2 years of staring at them. It was the expression of a man realizing that the most useful person in the room is not who he had expected. You were a bookkeeper, Ramon said. It was not quite a question. My father was an accountant. I worked with him from the time I was 12 until he died. She did not say more than that. I know what financial fraud looks like in records, and I know that the kind of operation Crow is running leaves traces if you know where to look. Ramon nodded slowly. I'll talk to Reyes. He looked at Caleb. And I'll get you names. 3 other operators who've had the same experience. Men who won't come forward on their own because they're afraid, or they've already sold and think it's over for them. But if someone asks them directly, I'll do it, Caleb said. We'll do it, Evelyn said. Caleb looked at her. She met his eyes without backing down. You're going to need someone who can sit across from those men and help them understand what their records actually show. That's not a job for a rancher. It's a job for someone who can read a ledger and explain what she sees in language that will hold up in front of a territorial judge. He could not argue with that. He was not entirely sure he wanted to. Ramon left by noon with a list of names they had compiled between the 3 of them and a plan to speak with Hector Reyes before the week was out. The shape of what they were attempting had grown from a single water rights defense into something considerably larger and more dangerous, and Caleb felt the weight of that shift as he watched Ramon ride south on the wet road. Crow will find out, he said when Ramon was out of sight. Yes, Evelyn said. She was standing beside him at the gate. He already suspects something. The lawyer's protest was filed too fast. That wasn't a response to the certification. That was already prepared. He had the protest ready before you even reached Cheyenne. He was expecting me to get there. He wanted to delay, not prevent. She looked at the road. If he'd wanted to prevent it, he would have sent someone after me directly. What he wants is a prolonged legal process that he can control through the territorial system. He has connections in Laramie. How do you know that? His lawyer told me. She paused. Not directly. But he said when he was threatening me, he said that the hearing would go the way hearings in Laramie go. That was a specific thing to say. It meant he had already thought about how to manage the outcome at that level. Caleb turned this over. Which means we can't just win the legal argument. We have to make the scope of what he's been doing large enough that the territorial court can't manage it quietly. Exactly. He looked at her. The morning light was thin and cold, and she looked tired still, 2 days of hard riding in her face. But her eyes were clear, and she was thinking about the problem the way she always thought about problems, not from the fear of what could go wrong, but from the logic of what needed to happen. You should have told me about the threat his lawyer made, he said. When you got back. Not this morning, she looked at him. I handled it. I know you handled it. That's not why I'm saying it. He was not sure exactly why he was saying it. He found the words with some difficulty. You're carrying things alone that you don't have to carry alone anymore. That's all. The silence between them was the particular kind that happens when someone says something true and the other person is not sure what to do with it. All right, she said finally. It was the third or fourth time he had heard her say those words, and each time they meant something slightly different, and each time they cost her something to say. I'll tell you next time. Noah appeared at the porch railing above them, having clearly been monitoring the conversation from the elevated position with his usual careful attention. Are we going to have more problems? He called down. We're always going to have more problems, Caleb called back. That's what a ranch is. Noah considered this. Okay, he said, and went back inside. Evelyn made a sound beside him that was almost a laugh. The following 2 weeks were the hardest sustained work Caleb had done since the drought year, and the drought year had at least been a single recognizable disaster rather than a multi-front operation that required him to simultaneously manage the ranch, coordinate with Ramon, approach 4 separate ranchers about a subject that was either brave or reckless depending on how it went, and keep close enough watch on Crow's men that he would know when the inevitable retaliation came. Because retaliation was coming. He had known Silas Crow for long enough to understand the man's rhythms. Crow did not respond to threats immediately. He was patient in the way that predators with reliable advantages are patient not because he was disciplined, but because he had never had to hurry. When he finally moved, it would be decisive and it would hit something Caleb cared about, because Crow understood leverage. The question was what he valued enough that Crow could use it. That question had a more complicated answer than it would have had 2 months ago. The first rancher they visited was a man named Dolph Gruber, who had sold his north pasture to Crow 3 years ago under circumstances he described, when pressed as mutually agreeable. While his hands told a different story, they were clasped on the table in front of him, with a tension that contradicted every word he was saying. He did not agree to testify. But when Evelyn asked, quietly and without pressure, whether he still had his sales records and the correspondence with the lending company that had held his notes, he got up from the table and was gone for 5 minutes, and came back with a tin box and set it on the table without a word. And Evelyn spent an hour going through it while Caleb sat with Gruber, and they talked about nothing in particular, and when she was done, she had made careful notes, and she thanked Gruber and they left. In the wagon on the road back, she said, the lending rate in his notes was 14% above standard. The default trigger clause was written so that a single missed payment, any payment, for any reason constituted immediate full default. He didn't have a chance. The moment his operation hit one bad season, Crow's lending company owned him. Is that enough for the hearing? It's enough for a pattern. We need 3 more like it. They got 2 more over the following week. They did not get the third. The rancher in question had sold everything and left Wyoming entirely. Destination unknown, which was itself a kind of evidence. Hector Reyes was the unexpected one. He was a small man, 57, with the careful movements of someone who has learned to take up less space than he is owed. He met them at his place east of town on a Thursday afternoon, and he listened to what they were building with his hat in his hands. And when they were done, he was quiet for a long moment. I kept the veterinary records, he said, from when my cattle got sick. I kept them because I didn't know what else to do with them. He looked at the floor. My wife said to throw them out. She said carrying it around was just keeping a wound open. But I couldn't. He stopped. The vet told me privately that what killed my cattle was not what he put in his official report. He told me to be careful. He wouldn't say more than that. Is the vet still in the county? Evelyn asked. Moved to Colorado 2 years ago. Reyes looked up. But I have his private letter. He wrote it to me because I think he felt guilty. He wrote it and I kept it. Caleb leaned forward. What did the letter say? Reyes got up and went to a shelf and took down a box, and from the box he produced an envelope. And from the envelope he unfolded a letter that had been read enough times that the creases were soft. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it carefully. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, the slight adjustment of someone who has found a piece they did not know they were looking for. He identified the compound, she said. She looked at Caleb. The vet identified the compound that killed Reyes's cattle. He said in this letter that, in his professional opinion, the poisoning was deliberate and consistent with access from the northern fence line. She set the letter on the table carefully, like something fragile. The northern fence line that borders Crow's range. Reyes was watching them. Will that help? Yes, Evelyn said. Mr. Reyes, I believe it will help considerably. He exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to carry something with it. I just want to know it meant something. That I'm not the only one who... He stopped again. Crow sat across from me at my kitchen table when I sold. He had coffee. He was pleasant. He said he hoped I would be comfortable. He looked at his hands. I kept thinking about that. How pleasant he was. Caleb understood that. He understood it in a way he had not expected to, because the particular horror of a man like Crow was not the cruelty but the pleasantness, the way he conducted destruction as if it were simply business, as if the people on the other side of the table were not real enough to warrant any other approach. He'll be pleasant at the hearing too, Evelyn said. That's all right, we won't need him to be unpleasant. We just need the paper to say what it says. They drove back to the Broken Bow in the late afternoon with Reyes's documents and the vet's letter and the accumulating weight of what they were building. And Caleb was quiet most of the way, and Evelyn let him be quiet, which was something he had come to appreciate about her. She did not fill silence with noise just because silence was uncomfortable. Noah was waiting at the gate when they pulled in, sitting on the top rail with his feet hooked through the lower rungs, which was a position of some precariousness, and which Caleb had told him twice was not a good idea. He was doing it anyway, though he climbed down with studied casualness when he saw the wagon, as if he had simply been standing nearby. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Well," Evelyn said. Noah looked at Caleb for confirmation, which had become a habit of his that Caleb had noticed he would get information from one of them and then check it against the other, not because he doubted either one, but because he had learned early that adults sometimes managed the truth in ways that required cross-referencing. Well, Caleb confirmed. Noah nodded and opened the gate. It was 11 days later that Crow moved. Caleb had expected something. He had watched the Eastern Line every evening, had kept careful track of Crow's men on the surrounding roads, had noted that the frequency of visible surveillance had dropped in the past week, which was the pattern Ramon had warned him about. Crow went quiet before he acted. What he had not anticipated was the direction. It started at 2 a.m. with a smell. Smoke. He was out of bed and at the window before he was fully awake, the rancher's instinct for fire preceding conscious thought by several seconds. The sky to the south was wrong, not dark but orange, tinged at the base of the ridge, a glow that had no business being there. He was pulling on his boots when the door of the back room opened, and Evelyn appeared in the hallway, already dressed, which told him she had smelled it too, and had been moving before he was out of bed. "South pasture," she said. "South pasture." He grabbed his coat. "Noah." "I'll get him. Go." He ran. The fire was in the dry grass of the lower south pasture, which had not had rain in 12 days and was exactly the wrong thing to be burning. The flames were moving northeast with the wind, which was moving them toward the main cattle enclosure, where he was holding 60 head, and the distance between the fire's leading edge and the enclosure fence was closing fast. He shouted for his ranch hands, 2 men brothers, who bunked in the small building at the east end of the yard, and they came out running before he reached their door, which meant they had smelled it too. "Wet sacks," Caleb said. "Everything you can find. Water barrels from the barn. Get the fire line started at the fence." They moved. He moved. What happened in the next hour was the kind of work that leaves marks on a body hauling water, beating at flames with wet burlap, cutting a brake line through the grass with a hand tool when the water was running low, the smoke so thick in places that he was moving by feel and by the sound of the fire rather than sight. The wind helped and then did not help, shifting twice in ways that required them to abandon one section and sprint to another. He was at the far end of the brake line when he heard Evelyn's voice, not panicked, the opposite of panicked, with the particular controlled urgency of someone managing a crisis by keeping their voice flat. "Caleb, the barn," he turned. Noah was not beside her. The connection happened before she finished saying it. The barn. The calf they had been nursing for 2 weeks in the back stall. The boy who had been visiting that calf every morning and evening, with a dedication that Caleb had not commented on, but had noticed, and he was already running. The barn was not on fire. Not yet. The smoke was rolling past it in a dense curtain from the south, and the frightened sounds from inside were the cattle and horses, not flames. But the visibility through the smoke was almost nothing, and the barn door was partly open, in the way it was partly open when someone had gone through it in a hurry. He went in. The interior was a managed chaos, animals moving, horses pulling at their ties, the calf in the back stall making the high distressed noise that had apparently been enough to bring Noah here in the middle of the night. He found the boy at the back of the barn, on the other side of the calf's stall gate, coughing, his hands on the calf's neck. "Noah," Caleb's voice came out harder than he intended. The boy looked up. His eyes were watering from the smoke. "She's scared," he said. "She was going to hurt herself on the gate. She's fine. Come here. She is fine." He crossed the stall, took Noah by the arm with more firmness than gentleness, and picked him up. The boy was heavier than he expected and lighter than he expected simultaneously, the paradox of a child who has learned to carry himself like someone larger. Noah did not resist. He pressed his face against Caleb's shoulder, coughing. Caleb carried him out. Outside was the smoke and the orange light, and Evelyn was 10 feet from the barn door. And when she saw them, she crossed the distance at a run and reached for Noah, and then stopped herself one visible moment of decision, and looked at the boy in Caleb's arms instead. "Are you all right?" she said to Noah. Yes, he was still coughing. The calf is fine," Caleb said. He set the boy down. Noah's feet found the ground, and he straightened and turned immediately to look at the south pasture, assessing the fire with the same forward-facing attention Caleb had seen from him a dozen times. The same refusal to be simply a child in a crisis. "Is it going to reach the enclosure?" Noah asked. "Not if we get back to work," Caleb said. He looked at Evelyn over the boy's head. Something passed between them that was not words and acknowledgement, an understanding, the particular communication of people who have been through something together and have come out on the other side of it changed. "Take him to the house," Caleb said. "I know what to do with the waterline," Evelyn said. "Better than Garza's brother. Honestly, I've watched you do it twice. I'm not arguing about this right now." "Good. Send me to the waterline and take Noah to the house yourself, or I work the line and you manage Noah. Either way, we need another person on the fire." He looked at her. She was right. She was always right about the practical calculations, which was either her greatest quality or the most infuriating thing about her, and right now, he did not have time to determine which. "Waterline," he said. "You know the break point? 40 feet from the east enclosure corner, I know." She went. Caleb took Noah to the house and sat him at the kitchen table and poured him water and said, "Stay here." You can stay here," Caleb said. "You already did the thing you needed to do. Now let us do the rest." Noah looked at him. Something in his expression was not quite obedience, and not quite agreement. It was more like a child making a genuine assessment of whether the adult in front of him is trustworthy enough to follow, and arriving at yes. "Okay," he said. Caleb went back to the fire. They stopped it 45 minutes later, just short of the enclosure fence, close enough that the corner post was scorched, close enough that another 10 minutes of wind from the same direction would have been catastrophic. When it was done, and the brake line was holding, and the last of the flames were beaten down to smoldering grass and dark ground, Caleb stood at the edge of the burned section and looked at what was left. The south pasture was going to need the rest of the season to recover. 30, maybe 35 acres, not the worst outcome possible. Not a good outcome. Evelyn came to stand beside him. She was dirty, her sleeves scorched at one cuff, where she had gotten too close to something, her hair entirely free of whatever she had done with it before she ran outside. "I found something," she said. "Tell me." At the south fence line where the fire started, she did not look at him. She was looking at the scorched ground. There's a section where the fence was cut. Recently, the wire ends aren't rusted, and there's a kerosene smell on the grass on the crow side of the line. The anger that moved through Caleb was cold and exact. "You're sure? I photographed it." "In my head, I know exactly where it is, and I can take you there in daylight." She looked at him now. "We need someone else to see it before Crow's men can come back and change it. Someone with authority, Ramon," Caleb said, "and Dr. Emmett. Emmett's been county medical examiner for 20 years. His witness statement carries weight. Can you get them here by morning?" "I can try," she nodded. Then, without transition, she said, "He went into a burning barn for a calf." Caleb was quiet. "He's 5 years old," she said. "He'll be 6 in August." Her voice was level, but he could hear what was underneath it, the particular fear that arrives after a crisis is over, when there is finally space for it. "I spend so much time making sure he's not frightened that I forget he is also terrifying. That he will walk toward the thing that scares him because that's what he has watched me do. That's not a bad thing to have learned. I know it's not." She exhaled. "I know, I wasn't ready to see it." She looked at the scorched ground. He was protecting something he'd decided was his to protect. He's been doing that his whole life. Just usually it's been me. Caleb thought about the porch. 3 weeks ago, the boy in his nightclothes at 2 in the morning, saying I wanted to know if something was wrong. He thought about the biscuits wrapped in cloth on the fence rail. He thought about all right, on the wagon seat, and the stick fence with its gate that actually swung, and a 5-year-old explaining frost heave in the serious voice of someone who finds knowledge genuinely useful. "He's not who I thought he was," Caleb said. He was not talking about that night specifically. Evelyn seemed to understand this. "No," she said, "he's not." She looked at the burned grass. "He never was. You just didn't know him yet." They stood for a moment more, and then the practical demands of the situation reasserted themselves: the animals to check, the enclosure fence to examine, the horses to settle. The scorched fence section to document before daylight changed everything. They went back to work. Inside the house at the kitchen table, Noah had fallen asleep with his head on his arms. He was still in his coat. His hands were folded under his cheek, and his face in sleep lost the careful composure that it held when he was awake. and he looked exactly like what he was, a nearly 6-year-old boy who had been up since 2 in the morning protecting something he loved. Caleb stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him for a moment. Then he went to the chest at the end of the hall and took out a blanket, the heavy one, the good one, and he came back and laid it over the boy without waking him. And he stood there another moment in the dark kitchen with the smell of smoke still on everything and the sound of the ranch settling around them. He thought about what Ramon had said, 7 years of systematic pressure. He thought about the cut fence wire and the kerosene smell on the wrong side of the line. He thought about Hector Reyes sitting at his table with a letter he had read too many times, saying, "I just want to know it meant something." And he thought about what Evelyn had said on the train platform, the first day, the day he had made the worst decision of his life in front of an audience. "I thought if you could see him before you made up your mind, it might matter." She had been right. He just had not been ready to see it then. He had needed 3 weeks of fence repairs and ledger work and midnight porridge and stick fences and a barn full of smoke before he was ready. He was ready now. He tucked the blanket around Noah's shoulders, a small adjustment, practical, nothing more, and went outside to find Ramon Vasquez and begin the work of making sure that what Silas Crow had done in a south pasture in the middle of the night meant exactly what it was going to mean in a territorial courtroom in Laramie. Ramon Vasquez arrived before dawn. Caleb had sent one of the Garza brothers on horseback with a note that said only fire. South fence. Come before light changes it. Ramon was the kind of man who understood what that meant without requiring elaboration, and he rode in at 5:15 with Dr. Emmett beside him, which meant Ramon had already anticipated the next step and collected the doctor on his way through Silver Creek, which was either impressive foresight or evidence that Ramon had been expecting something like this for longer than he had said. Emmett was 64 years old and had been county medical examiner for 22 years, and before that had served as a field surgeon in circumstances he did not discuss. And he brought to every situation the same quality that Caleb had always found useful in him. He looked at what was in front of him and told you what he saw, without managing it for your comfort. He was also, critically, the kind of man whose written statement carried weight in a territorial court because he had never, in 22 years, been demonstrated to be wrong about a physical fact. The 4 of them, Caleb, Evelyn, Ramon, and Emmett, walked the south fence line in the gray pre-dawn light while the burned ground was still warm in places, and the smell of char and kerosene sat heavy in the cold air. Emmett crouched at the section Evelyn had identified and looked at the cut fence wire with the attention of someone reading a document. He did not touch it. He looked at the ground on both sides of the line, leaning close, his old knees apparently indifferent to the cold, wet grass. "How many hours ago?" he said, not a question exactly. "Fire started around 2, Caleb said. "We got it under control by 3:15. Emmett nodded. He moved along the fence, still crouching, examining the ground in a slow progression that nobody interrupted. After a few minutes, he stood and looked at Ramon. "Kerosene," he said. "On this side, not that side," meaning Crow's side, the source. "Wire cut with a tool not broken by pressure or wear. The ends are clean. And there's a boot print here," he pointed without touching. "That's larger than anyone standing here right now and has a heel pattern I don't recognize from Silver Creek." "Can you document it?" Evelyn asked. "I can write a statement of physical observation that will hold up in front of any judge in this territory." He looked at her with something that was almost approval. "You were the one who found it. I was at the fence line for the waterwork. Smart place to be." He straightened and looked at Caleb. "You're building a case." "We're building a case," Caleb said. Emmett looked between the 2 of them and at Ramon and back at Caleb. "You're going to make an enemy of Silas Crow in a way that cannot be walked back." "He already burned my south pasture," Caleb said. "I think we're past the point of walking anything back." Emmett considered this all right. "Get me paper, and I'll write the statement now, while the details are fresh." He looked at the burned ground once more. "I'll tell you something. I've seen a lot of things in this county that I wrote down as weather and accident because there was no one asking the right questions. It's possible I have notes going back 8 years that are worth looking at again." The morning light was coming in properly now, turning the burned south pasture from orange-black to gray-brown, and Caleb stood at the fence line with the smell of kerosene and char still in his lungs, and felt the thing that had been building for weeks, the gathered evidence, the ranchers who had finally talked, Hector Reyes's veterinary letter, Ramon's records, the certified survey coalesce into something that had shape and weight, and was pointed directly at the hearing in Laramie. They went back to the house. Noah was awake when they came in, sitting at the kitchen table with the blanket still around his shoulders, eating the porridge he had made himself slightly too thick, but made. He looked at the 4 adults filing into his kitchen with the calm assessment of a child who has learned that the number of serious-faced adults in a room is a reasonable proxy for the seriousness of the situation. "Is it done?" he asked his mother. The fire's out, she said. We're working on the rest. He nodded and slid off his chair and took his bowl to the wash basin, and then looked at Emmett, who he had apparently not met. Do you want porridge? He said. There's enough. Emmett looked at the boy for a moment. That would be welcome, son. Thank you. Noah made porridge for 4 adults with the focused competence of someone who has decided that this is his contribution to a difficult morning, and nobody remarked on it except Ramon, who ate 2 bowls and told Noah it was better than what his wife made, which was almost certainly not true, but which made the boy stand slightly straighter, in a way he was clearly trying to conceal. Emmett wrote his statement at the kitchen table, while Evelyn laid out the accumulated evidence in the organized sequence she had been developing over the past 2 weeks: the lending records from Gruber, Reyes's veterinary letter, Ramon's account of the cattle losses and the forced sale pattern, the water claim documents, the prior use affidavit that was demonstrably fabricated, and now Emmett's physical documentation of the arson at the fence line. She had a system built from the accounting logic her father had taught her, and watching her arrange it, Caleb understood again why she had been the one to ride to Cheyenne. It was not just that she was willing to go. It was that she was the only person in this situation who could have gone and returned with exactly what was needed. When Emmett finished writing, he set his pen down and looked at the full spread of what Evelyn had laid out. This is enough, he said. Not just for the water claim, for the criminal referral. We need the hearing first, Evelyn said. The water claim establishes standing. The pattern establishes the larger charge. Who's presenting? She looked at Caleb. We both are, Caleb said. Ramon set his coffee down. I want to testify, not just provide a statement. I want to be in that room, so do I, said Emmett. Caleb looked at the people at his kitchen table. Ramon Vasquez, who had come before dawn and whose family had ranched this county for 2 generations, Emmett, who had been writing down things he called accidents for 8 years, and was now offering to reconsider every one of them. Evelyn with her organized evidence and her precise mind and her coffee going cold while she worked, and Noah, who had retreated to the porch railing to give the adults the table but was visible through the window, sitting in his usual careful posture, watching the burned south pasture, with the serious eyes of a child taking inventory of damage. He had not asked to be part of any of this. He had simply arrived on a train platform with his mother's hand in his too-light coat and his enormous capacity for making himself useful, and somewhere in the space between frost-heave explanations and midnight porridge and a barn full of smoke he had become the axis, around which Caleb's understanding of everything had shifted. All right, Caleb said. Laramie. The weeks between the fire and the hearing were not quiet. Crow made 2 more moves, both of which Caleb had anticipated, and neither of which landed the way Crow had intended. The first was a formal complaint filed with the county assessor's office, claiming that Caleb's cattle had damaged the fence line on the Crow boundary, a transparent reversal of the actual situation, clearly designed to muddy the record before the hearing. The second was a conversation Crow had with the Silver Creek bank manager that resulted in a letter to Caleb suggesting that his line of credit would be reviewed in the coming quarter. The bank letter was the one that rattled him, briefly, because it was the kind of pressure that operated on reality rather than on paper. If his credit was pulled before the summer cattle sales, the cash flow situation at the Broken Bow would become genuinely dangerous. He told Evelyn about the letter the evening it arrived. He had not planned to. He sat at the kitchen table with it, and she came in from the side room where she had been working on the hearing documents and looked at his face and said, "What is it?" And he handed her the letter. She read it. She set it on the table. She was quiet for a moment. "How much of your operating credit depends on that line?" she asked. He told her. It was not a number he was comfortable saying out loud, which meant it was the right number to tell her. She did not react to it with alarm, which was either because she was better at managing her reactions than he was, or because she had already calculated the range of possibilities and knew this one was survivable. He suspected both. "We have 8 weeks before the review," she said. "Summer kettle sales close the gap if the south pasture loss doesn't affect the head count significantly." She looked at her notes. "It doesn't, based on what you moved to the upper pasture. We can also defer the north fence material purchase if we do the labor ourselves rather than bringing in hands." She looked at him. "It's tight, but it's manageable." "You sound certain." "I'm not certain, I'm calculating." She looked at the letter again. "He wants you to feel like the floor is dropping out. If you make a panicked decision in the next 8 weeks, you make his job easier." She folded the letter and set it aside with the particular deliberate movement that meant she was putting it in its proper place in the overall picture. "Don't make a panicked decision." "I'm not panicking," he said, slightly sharp. "I know," she said. "I'm reminding you for when 3 in the morning comes and the letter feels bigger than it is." He looked at her. She was right about that, too. 3 in the morning, that night and 2 nights following. The letter did feel bigger than it was. And he lay in the dark, going through numbers and contingencies, and the specific quality of dread that belongs to men who have built something with their hands and can feel the ground under it becoming uncertain. But he did not make any panicked decisions. He got up each morning and worked the ranch and trusted the numbers Evelyn had run, which was a form of trust he had not extended to another person in a very long time, and which did not feel entirely comfortable, but felt, beneath the discomfort, like the right thing. Noah noticed the way he noticed everything. "You're not sleeping right," the boy said one morning, about a week after the bank letter, when they were at the north fence with the repair materials Caleb had decided to purchase. After all, some expenses could not be deferred, regardless of what the numbers said. "Sleeping fine," Caleb said. "You're not," Noah said with the calm certainty of someone reporting an observable fact. "You get a line here," he touched his own forehead, between his brows, "when you haven't slept. Mama gets it too when she's been up late, working." Caleb handed him the wire tensioner, which Noah could now operate adequately for light gauge work. "Hold that." Noah held it. "Is it the bank letter?" Caleb stopped. "You heard that. I hear most things. I told you." He was not apologetic about it. "Is it?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, hands on the fence wire, and he thought about what Evelyn had said, reminding you for when 3 a.m. comes, and he thought about what it meant that this 5-year-old boy knew about the bank letter and about the hearing and about the kerosene smell at the south fence line, and had apparently processed all of it with the equanimity of someone for whom difficult circumstances were simply the landscape in which life occurred. He said. "Mama says it's going to be all right. Your mama has a talent for saying that. She only says it when she believes it." Noah adjusted his grip on the tensioner. "She doesn't say it when she doesn't. She just gets quiet instead." He looked at the fence wire. "She's been saying it, not getting quiet." So Caleb looked at the boy. He thought, not for the first time, that Noah was the most honest accounting of what it meant to grow up inside a difficult life without being destroyed by it, a child who had simply incorporated hard things into his understanding of the world, and continued, each morning, to make porridge and hold tensioners and build gates that actually swung. He didn't say any of that. He finished the fence section and they moved to the next one, and the morning was cold and clear and the burned south pasture was showing, at its edges, the first tentative signs of grass coming back, which was not a miracle, but was the thing that happened when ground had time and wasn't disturbed. 6 days before the hearing, something happened that Caleb had not predicted. Walt Sims came back. He came to the front gate this time, not the road, and he waited there until Caleb saw him from the yard and came over, and his expression was different from the last time. Not the discomfort of a man delivering unwanted news, but something closer to resolution, the face of a person who has made a decision that cost them something. "I want to testify," Sims said. Caleb looked at him. "I know things," Sims said, "about how Crow operates. I've been close enough to his outfit that I've seen things I told myself weren't my business." He looked at the gate post. "My father homesteaded this county. I said that to you last time. I've been saying it to myself for 3 years, trying to figure out what it means. And what it means is that I don't want to be the man who watched this happen and said it wasn't his business." "Crow will cut you off," Caleb said economically. "He'll make sure the small operations that depend on his patronage stop dealing with you." "I know that, you're sure." "I'm not sure of anything," Sims said. "But I'm doing it anyway." Caleb opened the gate. The night before they left for Laramie, Caleb sat on the porch alone for a long time after everyone else was in bed. The sky was clear and cold, the way it got in early summer when the days were warm but the nights remembered winter, and the broken bow sat around him in its familiar particular silence, the sound of the horses settling in the barn, the distant sound of cattle, the creak of the porch boards that he had been meaning to replace for 2 years. He had built this place. He had built it after losing things he had not expected to lose, and he had built it with the specific purpose of making something that could not be taken from him, something that existed because of his own hands and his own labor, and nothing else. The idea that another person could dismantle it through legal manipulation and financial pressure, and a kerosene fire in the dark had sat in him for months as something close to helplessness, which was the feeling he was worst at tolerating. But sitting on the porch that night before Laramie, he realized that the helplessness had shifted. Not because the situation was easier, it wasn't, but because the situation was no longer his alone. He had not chosen that. It had happened the way things happen when you are paying attention to other problems gradually, then completely, the way water changes the shape of ground over time without any single moment being the moment. A door opened behind him. He did not turn. He heard the quiet footsteps and felt the particular quality of presence that he had learned to recognize over the past weeks. Noah sat down beside him on the porch step. He was in his nightclothes, and his coat, which was now the right weight for Wyoming Caleb, had replaced it 3 weeks ago without making any comment about it. Just left it on the hook by the door in the boy's size. And Noah had put it on the next morning and not said anything either, which was somehow exactly the right response. They sat for a while. Are you scared? Noah asked. Caleb considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Some, he said. Hearings are uncertain things. Crow has resources we don't. But you have the paper. We have the paper and the people. He looked at the dark yard. That should be enough. I think it will be. Mama thinks it will be, Noah said. I know. Another silence. The stars over the northern ridge were sharp and numerous, the kind of sky that only happened when the air was dry and cold, and there was no competing light for miles. Mr. Mercer, Noah said. What? If it goes wrong, he stopped. Started again. If the hearing goes wrong and he gets the water, will you have to sell? The question was asked quietly and precisely, in the voice of a child who has already thought through the downstream consequences, and is asking because he wants factual information, not because he is afraid. It would make things very difficult, Caleb said. I won't lie to you about that. But you wouldn't want to. No, I wouldn't want to. Noah looked at the stars. We could help more, he said. Mama and me. She's already making the books better, and I can do more than I was doing at the start. I know how to do the water rotation now, mostly. And the fence worked the lighter gauge I can do without help. He was not offering this as a negotiation. He was offering it as a fact, the way he offered most things. I know we came here in a way that wasn't what you expected. But we're here now, and I think we should stay. Caleb was quiet for a long time. The boy waited him out. He had learned to do that, had always known how to do it. Probably. And he sat with his knees drawn up in his too big coat and his serious eyes on the northern sky, patient in the way that children sometimes are when they have decided something and are waiting for the adult to catch up. You're right, Caleb said. You should stay. Noah looked at him. Not because of the ranch, Caleb said. I want to be clear about that. Not because you're useful, though you are. He found the words with some difficulty, the way he always found words that mattered. Because I should have said it on that train platform, and I didn't, and I've been working my way back to it ever since. Noah looked at him for a long moment. His face was doing the complicated thing it did when he was processing something significant and deciding how much of that processing to show. Okay, he said. Just that. Then he leaned over very slightly until his shoulder was against Caleb's arm. Not a hug, not a dramatic gesture. Just a small, physical, unambiguous answer. Caleb did not move. He sat very still and looked at the stars and felt the weight of that small shoulder against his arm and thought about all the ways a man could be wrong and all the ways he could, if he was not too proud to look at what was in front of him, eventually get himself right. Inside the house, he could see the lamp still burning in the side room, where Evelyn was working organizing papers for the Laramie hearing, ordering the evidence into the sequence that would tell, clearly and without drama, exactly what Silas Crow had done to this county over 7 years. She had been doing that for weeks. She had been doing that since the day she arrived, in a way ordering the broken things, finding the pattern underneath the chaos, making the documents say what the truth needed them to say. He had rejected her on a train platform in front of a crowd, and she had lifted her chin, and she had stayed, and she had ridden 2 days to Cheyenne and back, and refused a threat against her son's name, and organized 5 ranchers who had been afraid to speak and documented arson at a fence line in the middle of the night. And she had made it all legible, made it into something that could walk into a territorial courtroom in Laramie and stand up. He owed her a great deal. He owed them both a great deal. He thought about what it would mean to say so. He was not ready to say so. Not tonight. Tonight there was the porch and the stars and the small shoulder against his arm. And tomorrow there was Laramie. And one thing at a time was the only way he had ever known how to move through a world that had a way of offering more than you could hold at once. But he was going to say it. He sat on the porch until Noah fell asleep against his arm, which happened gradually and then completely, the way it does with tired children. And then he carried him inside and laid him in his bed, his own bed, his room, the room that had been empty before August and was now simply Noah's room, full of sticks and a folded cloth and a small collection of interesting stones from the south pasture that had survived the fire. And he went to the kitchen and knocked on the side room doorframe. Evelyn looked up. It's late, he said. You should sleep. She looked at the papers in front of her. Another hour. You've done enough. It's ready. She looked at him for a moment. The lamp between them was burning low, same as the night she had shown him the water claim document, same kitchen table, same careful space between them that had been slowly, without either of them forcing it, becoming something other than professional distance. Is Noah asleep? She said. Yes. Did he stay up waiting for you? He did. She looked at the papers. He worries about you, she said. He doesn't show it, but he does, I know. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. He told me we should stay. He was informing me, not asking. She laughed at that, a real laugh, tired and genuine. That sounds like him. He listed his qualifications. The water rotation, the light gauge fence work. He's been practicing the fence work, she said. He asks questions in the evenings after you're done. He wants to know why things work the way they do. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He's a good boy, he said. The words came out simply, without the difficulty he might have expected, because they were simply true, and the truth of them had been accumulating for weeks, and had finally reached the point where there was nothing to do but say it. Evelyn looked at him, and her expression was not the complicated, guarded thing it sometimes was. It was something simpler. It was the face of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has just been told she can set it down for a moment. Yes, she said. He is. Get some sleep, Caleb said. Laramie in the morning. She nodded and turned back to the papers, but her shoulders had dropped slightly, the held tension releasing by a degree, and he went to his room and lay in the dark and thought about a territorial courtroom and a man who cut fences in the night and a certified survey and a strong box and 5 ranchers who had finally decided to speak, and he thought that the floor under everything felt, for the first time in months, like it was going to hold. He slept. They left for Laramie before sunrise. Caleb drove the wagon, and Evelyn sat beside him with the document case on her lap, a leather case he had not owned before last week, purchased from the dry goods store because she needed something that would keep the papers organized and protected on a 2-day road, and which she had filled with the careful precision of someone who has spent weeks building something and knows exactly what every piece is worth. Ramon rode alongside. Emmett had gone ahead the previous day, his old bones preferring a slower pace and a night's rest before the proceedings. Walt Sims had arranged his own travel. Hector Reyes was meeting them in Laramie. Noah was in the wagon bed, asleep for the first hour, then awake and watching the country pass with his usual inventory attention. He had not been told to stay home. That conversation had not happened, which was itself a kind of answer the broken bow without all 3 of them felt, to Caleb, like an incomplete equation, and apparently nobody had argued otherwise. The road to Laramie was 2 days of open country, and they made camp the first night at a creek crossing Caleb knew from previous drives, where the grass was good and the water ran clean. Ramon built the fire with the efficiency of a man who has done it 1,000 times, and they ate and were mostly quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to people moving toward something difficult, who have already said everything that needs to be said in preparation. Noah sat close to the fire, with a stick in his thoughts, and eventually said, to no one in particular, "What does the judge look like?" "Never met him," Caleb said. Old Ramon said, white hair. "He's been on the territorial bench for 12 years. His name is Aldous Crane, and he has a reputation for not tolerating waste of his time." "Is our case a waste of his time?" Noah asked. "No," Evelyn said. "Then we're fine," Noah said, and went back to his stick, as if that settled it. Ramon caught Caleb's eye across the fire and said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly, which from Ramon was the equivalent of a broad smile. They reached Laramie on the 2nd afternoon, and the town received them with the indifference that territorial capitals show toward everyone: too much traffic, too many people moving through with too many urgent matters, to take particular note of a rancher and a woman and a boy and a Mexican cattleman arriving in a farm wagon. Crow was already there. Caleb saw his outfit's horses at the rail outside the largest hotel in town, and he noted the number of them: 6 horses, which meant Crow had brought lawyers and witnesses and probably men whose purpose was simply presence, the physical grammar of power that says, "I have resources enough to spare on this." Caleb had a certified survey, 5 ranchers, a doctor's statement, a veterinary letter, and Evelyn Hart. He decided that was enough. He had to decide that, because the alternative was to stand in a Laramie street, looking at Crow's horses and feel the floor go uncertain again, and he had promised himself in the dark the night before that he was done with that. They took rooms at a smaller establishment, 2 streets over, modest, clean, run by a woman named Pearl Ochoa, who gave Noah a piece of dried apple without being asked, and told him he could sleep in the room with the window that looked at the mountains, which Noah accepted with the grave courtesy of someone receiving a significant gift. That evening, Evelyn spread the documents on the room's small table, and they went through the presentation sequence one final time: Caleb, Evelyn, Ramon, while Noah sat on the bed with his back against the wall and listened without being told to be quiet, because he was always quiet when things mattered. "Crane will let Crow's lawyers speak first," Evelyn said. "They'll lead with the prior use affidavit and the argument that the certification process was irregular. We don't respond to either of those directly at the start. We present the original survey and its date. We establish the documented claim history, and we let the prior date speak for itself." She looked at the papers. "Then we present the pattern." "In what order?" Ramon asked. "Chronological. Reyes first, his losses are oldest, and the veterinary letter is the most concrete single piece of evidence we have. Then Gruber's lending records. Then Sims. because his testimony about what he witnessed from inside Crow's operation is the piece that connects the individual incidents into deliberate strategy. She set her pen down, then Emmett's physical statement on the fire last. Because the fire is the most recent and the most obvious act, and if we present it last, it closes the pattern at its most extreme point and makes dismissal very difficult. And you're presenting all of this, Caleb said. You're presenting the water claim. Your ranch, your claim, your voice. She looked at him. I'm presenting the pattern documentation. That's my contribution to the record. Crow's lawyers will try to discredit you, Ramon said. He said it plainly, not cruelly. I know what they'll try, she said. My father's debts are public record. Noah's existence is visible to anyone with eyes. She did not look up from the papers. They can try whatever they like. The documents don't care about my history. Caleb looked at her across the table, the lamp between them again, same as every important conversation they had ever had, as if the important things in their life together could only be said across a lit lamp on a table, and he thought about what she had said in Cheyenne, according to what she'd told him afterward, that she had refused the lawyer's threat because her son's existence was not a bargaining chip. He thought about what it had cost her to say that, and what it had cost her every day since, and what she had done with the cost, not carried it as bitterness, not spent it on anger, just converted it, the way she converted everything into forward motion. He had known people in his life who were strong in the way that meant they did not bend. Evelyn was strong in the way that meant she bent completely and came back. That was harder. That was rarer. He knew which one had actually kept the broken bow alive. Get some sleep, he said. Same as the night before Laramie. And this time she did. The hearing convened at 9 in the morning in the territorial courthouse, which was a solid sandstone building that still its wood polish and old paper, and the particular institutional gravity of a room where decisions are recorded and kept. Judge Aldous Crane was exactly as Ramon had described, white-haired, economical in movement, with the expression of a man who has heard every possible version of every possible dispute and is prepared to hear another one without being surprised by it. Crow sat at his table with 2 lawyers and 2 witnesses, and the comfortable posture of a man who has been in rooms like this before and has generally found them agreeable. He wore a good coat. He nodded to Caleb across the room with the pleasant expression that Hector Reyes had described the pleasantness of a man for whom the people on the other side of the table are simply variables in a calculation. Caleb nodded back and turned away. Crow's lawyers presented first, as Evelyn had predicted. The lead attorney was a man named Forsyth, polished, precise, the kind of lawyer who had been educated somewhere Eastern and had brought the manner of Eastern courtrooms to the frontier without adjusting for the fact that frontier judges had generally heard every polished Eastern argument and found most of them less impressive than they were intended to be. Forsyth laid out the prior use affidavit with confidence, presenting 3 signed statements from Crow Ranch hands attesting to 12 years of consistent water access at the Eastern Creek boundary. He argued the certification irregularity with technical language that was designed to sound conclusive, but which Caleb, who had spent the past week reading everything Evelyn had given him to read, recognized as resting on a procedural interpretation that was genuinely debatable. Then Forsyth said something that had not been in any of the predicted arguments. He said that the claim was further complicated by the fact that the primary documentation witness, meaning Evelyn, had a financial history that raised questions about her reliability as an arranger of evidence, and that the court should be aware that the woman presenting these documents was a person of uncertain background who had arrived in Wyoming under circumstances that the county record could speak to. He did not say the word illegitimate. He did not have to. The implication was built into the phrasing, into the courtroom air, in the way that certain kinds of suggestion work not stated, just placed. Noah was sitting in the gallery with Ramon's arm loosely across the bench behind him, and Caleb did not look at the boy. He kept his eyes on Forsyth and kept his face flat and felt the anger move through him cold and clean. Judge Crane looked at Forsyth over his spectacles. The personal history of a documentation witness is relevant only to the degree that it bears on the integrity of the documents themselves. Does counsel have evidence that any document presented has been falsified or improperly obtained? The irregularity of the certification process is a procedural argument I have noted and will evaluate against the record. Crane's voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. I asked about document integrity, not personal history. Forsyth adjusted. The court will weigh what the court determines is relevant. Please continue with your substantive argument. It was not a victory, but it was a door closed, and Caleb felt the air in the room shift slightly, the way air shifts when the thing you were dreading happens and turns out to be survivable. Caleb presented the water claim. He was not a natural speaker in formal settings. He knew this about himself, had always known it, was better with wire and post hole diggers than with rooms full of people watching him. But he knew the broken bow. He knew the eastern boundary and the creek and the 11 years of his life that had gone into that land. And he spoke about it with the directness of someone who has nothing to perform because the facts are sufficient, and Crane listened with the attention of a judge who is accustomed to sorting the performed from the real. The certified survey went into the record. Prior claim date, March 14, 1871. The Land Office Registrar stamp was clear and unambiguous, and when Forsyth attempted the irregularity argument again in cross-examination, Crane let him speak for 90 seconds and then said, "The certification was performed by a licensed registrar according to documented procedure. The date of the original survey predates the earliest date in the prior use affidavit by 4 years. Unless counsel can demonstrate error in the physical dating of the survey itself, this particular argument is concluded." Forsyth could not demonstrate error in the physical dating of the survey. No one could because there was no error. Evelyn's stood to present the pattern documentation, and the room was very quiet. She was not performing. That was the thing Caleb watched from his seat, the complete absence of performance. The way she presented the documents as exactly what they were, without embellishment, without rhetorical elevation, with only the precision she brought to everything. She spoke about Hector Reyes's cattle losses and the veterinary letter, with the same tone she might have used to explain a ledger column. She presented Gruber's lending records and the 14% above standard interest rate, and the default trigger clause that made failure inevitable with the clarity of an accountant describing arithmetic. She explained the clause patiently, without condescension, as if she were explaining it to someone who simply hadn't seen it yet, rather than to a room full of people who were supposed to be deciding her future. Forsyth objected 3 times. Crane sustained 1 objection, overruled 2, and at one point said to Forsyth, without looking up from the document he was reviewing, "I can read a ledger, counsel. Please allow the witness to complete her explanation." Hector Reyes testified. He was small and careful on the stand, his hat in his hands, and he did not look at Crow while he spoke, which was a kind of courage that the room seemed to recognize. He described the cattle losses and the vet's private communication and the lending company's pressure and the conversation with Crow at his kitchen table when he had signed away his property. He said at the end, without being asked, "I want to say that I knew it was wrong. What was happening to me? I knew it, and I was too afraid, and I didn't have anyone asking the right questions at the time." "I'm sorry it took me this long," Crane said. "Your account is in the record, Mr. Reyes. That is what was required." Walt Sims testified about what he had witnessed from inside Crow's operational circle conversations he had overheard, instructions he had seen given, the pattern of which properties were targeted and when. He was not a polished witness. He fumbled twice and had to be redirected by Crane's patient questions, and at one point he looked directly at Crow across the room and lost his train of thought entirely for several seconds. But he recovered, and he finished, and what he said was in the record. Emmett's written statement was read into evidence by Crane himself. In the doctor's absence, Emmett had developed a fever the night before, and Pearl Ochoa had insisted he remain in bed, which he had resisted until Evelyn told him that his written statement was more valuable than his presence, and that the judge would read it with more attention than a sick old man could command from a witness stand. Emmett had accepted this with ill grace and stayed in bed. Crane read the statement carefully in the particular silence of a courtroom that has been listening for several hours and has found its rhythm. When he finished, he set it on his desk and looked at Forsyth. "Does counsel wish to respond to the physical evidence documented by the examining witness?" Forsyth tried. He argued that the kerosene smell cell was circumstantial, that the cut fence wire could have been damaged by cattle, that the boot print was insufficient identification. Crane listened to each argument and noted it for the record and moved on. Then Crane looked at the room. The court will recess for 1 hour. The hour was the longest Caleb had sat still in recent memory. They waited in the corridor outside the courtroom, him, Evelyn, Ramon, Reyes, Sims, and nobody said very much. Noah sat beside Caleb on the corridor bench, and after a while leaned against his arm the same way he had on the porch, with the same quiet, undemonstrative certainty, and Caleb sat with the boy's weight against him, and looked at the courthouse floor and waited. Evelyn was at the window at the end of the corridor, looking at the Laramie Street, her back to them. She was very still. He had learned to read the different qualities of her stillness. There was the working stillness of someone thinking through a problem, and the tired stillness of someone who has done all they can and is waiting on forces outside their control. This was the second kind. He got up and walked to the window. She did not turn when she heard him coming. "You did everything that could be done," he said. "I know," she said. "That's not always enough." "No," he agreed, "but it's what we have." She looked at the street. A wagon was passing below, loaded with timber. a man and a boy on the seat who looked something like the way he and Noah must look from a distance, the adult and the child, the ordinary geometry of people going somewhere together. "I want to tell you something," he said. He had not planned to say it here, in a courthouse corridor with Ramon and Reyes and Sims 30 feet behind them, and a judge making a decision about his ranch through a closed door. But waiting for the right moment was something he'd been doing too long already. "I've been working my way back to something since the day you arrived, and I since the platform." She turned then. Her expression was the careful one, the one that had learned not to assume. "I was afraid," he said. "That's the honest account of what happened. Not principle, not practicality. Fear. I had lost things before, and I had built something I could control, and I didn't want to open it to the possibility of losing it again." He looked at her. "I was wrong. I knew it that same night. I just didn't know yet what to do about it." She was quiet, looking at him. "You rode 2 days to Cheyenne," he said. "You refused a threat that would have broken most people. You took 5 men who were afraid to speak, and you made their records say what they needed to say. You kept my ranch alive when I was too proud and too stubborn to see how badly it needed help." He paused. "And you did all of it while Noah was watching, which means he knows what it looks like when someone chooses to be decent even when nobody is making them." Something moved across her face that she did not try to manage. "That matters more to me than the water rights," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever Crane decides in that room, that's the thing that matters most to me right now." She looked at him for a long moment, the way she looked at things she was taking the full measure of. "Caleb," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the formality, just the name, just that. "I know it's the wrong moment," he said. "It's not the wrong moment," she said. "It's exactly the right moment. You've just never been comfortable with the right moment." He almost smiled. "No," he said, "I haven't." She looked back at the street. Her hand was on the window ledge, and he put his hand beside hers, not on top of it, just beside it, which was as much as the corridor and the waiting and the closed door and everything else permitted right now, and she did not move her hand away. They stood like that until the courthouse door opened, and Crane's clerk appeared in the corridor and said the judge was ready. Crane returned to the bench with the same economical movement he had left it with, settled his papers, and looked at the room. "In the matter of the water rights claim on the eastern creek boundary of the Mercer property," he said, "the court finds that the original survey documentation establishes a prior claim date of March 14, 1871, which predates any claim that could be substantiated by the prior use affidavit submitted by the opposing party. The affidavit is dismissed. The water rights belong to the Mercer operation as documented." Forsyth began to speak. "I am not finished," Crane said without raising his voice. The room went still. "The additional evidence presented in this proceeding, the lending records, the veterinary documentation, the physical evidence of arson, and the testimony of multiple witnesses describes a pattern of conduct that exceeds the scope of a water rights dispute and constitutes grounds for criminal investigation." Crane looked at the papers on his desk. "The court is referring this matter to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for review of potential charges including fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and deliberate destruction of property. The court is further referring the conduct of the County Land Office clerk, whose office processed the prior use affidavit for administrative review, pending investigation of whether proper procedure was followed in its acceptance." He set his papers down. "The water rights claim is confirmed. The hearing is concluded." The sound in the room was not the dramatic eruption of a story that has been building to a single clean moment. It was quieter than that, a collective exhale, the sound of people who have been holding something tightly for a long time and are only now beginning to release it. Ramon put his hand on the table and looked at it. Ray sat with his eyes closed for a moment, just a moment, then opened them. Sims let out a long breath that seemed to carry 3 years in it. Evelyn did not react outwardly. She gathered the documents from the table with the same careful hands she had used to arrange them, returning each paper to its place in the leather case, doing the work that needed doing, because the work was always what she returned to. Caleb sat very still. Across the room, Silas Crow stood from his chair. He was still the most physically imposing man in the room, still the man with the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, still the man with the polished lawyers and the hotel with 6 horses at the rail. He was also, for the first time in the years Caleb had known him, a man who looked like the ground had gone uncertain under his feet. He did not say anything. He put on his hat and he walked out, and Forsyth followed, and the room was better for their absence. Noah was in the gallery, and when Caleb turned, he found the boy standing on the bench, his feet on the bench seat, not the floor, for the visibility, watching with his serious eyes. When he caught Caleb's look, he did not cheer or jump or do any of the things that a child in a story might do. He simply climbed down from the bench and walked down the gallery steps and through the low gate to the main floor and came to stand next to Caleb, and he said, "Did we win?" "We won," Caleb said. Noah nodded. "Okay," he said, which was the same word he had been saying since the day he climbed down from a wagon and decided that this was going to be all right. Then he went to his mother, and she pulled him in and held him, and he let her, and after a moment one of his hands came up and patted her back with the careful comfort of a child who has spent most of his life being the person his mother was strong for, and who is now, tentatively, trying out what it feels like to comfort her back. They drove home over 2 days the same road they had come in on, and the country looked different on the return, which was not because anything about the country had changed, but because the way you see land shifts when you know you are going back to it rather than away from it. The eastern range, the creek line, the ridge where the broken bow sat against the sky. Caleb had looked at all of it 10,000 times and would look at it 10,000 more, and none of those times would feel exactly like this one. Emmett recovered quickly once he knew the outcome, which Caleb suspected was less medicine than the particular restorative effect of a just result on an old man who had spent too long writing down things he knew were wrong. He was on his porch when they drove through Silver Creek, and he raised his hand and nodded, and that was enough. Hattie Doyle was less restrained. She appeared at the ranch gate 2 days after their return with a pie and the expression of someone who has been waiting to say "I told you so" for several months, and has chosen graciously to express this through baked goods instead. "The whole county is talking," she told Caleb when he met her at the gate. "I expect so. They're saying Crane referred the whole business to the territorial prosecutor." She looked at him with her direct, knowing eyes. "That crow is going to have a difficult winter." "That's for the prosecutor to determine," Caleb said. "Of course it is." She handed him the pie. "How is the boy?" "Good," Caleb said. And then, because it was true and Hattie would know it anyway, "He's very good." She smiled. "And the woman also good?" He paused. He thought about the courthouse corridor and the window and the hand on the ledge, working on it. Hattie's smile widened into something warmer and more private. "Well," she said, "don't take another 2 months about it. A woman like that doesn't wait forever." She rode away. Caleb stood at the gate with the pie and thought about timing and about the things you know before you are ready to say them, and about how much of the important work of a life consists of arriving, finally, at what you already knew. He did not take another 2 months about it. He waited 3 more weeks, which was long enough for the south pasture to show a full edge of new grass, long enough for the bank line of credit to be confirmed without review following the water rights decision, long enough for Noah's 6th birthday to arrive and be marked with a cake Evelyn made from the good flour, and a carved wooden horse Caleb had been working on in the barn in the evenings, which was not a fine piece of work, but was recognizably a horse, and was received with the careful, enormous pleasure of a child who does not yet have many things that are entirely his. The birthday was a small occasion, just the 3 of them, and Ramon, who arrived with tamales and the information that Hector Reyes had just bought back a small piece of land east of Silver Creek and intended to start again, which was the kind of news that meant more than it said. After Ramon left and Noah was in bed with his carved horse, Caleb went to the porch and sat, and after a few minutes Evelyn came out and sat beside him, and the night was warm for the first time this season, the kind of warm that arrives in Wyoming like a promise after the long argument of winter. He said what he had been working toward since the courthouse corridor, and before that since the fire, and before that since the stick fence and the bent wire hinge, and before that since the train platform where he had made the worst decision of his life with an audience, and had spent every day since moving backward toward the moment before he made it, trying to get himself right. He asked her to marry him. He did not dress it up. He said that he knew the beginning had been wrong, and that he could not undo the wrong of it, but that everything since had been the truest account he had of what he wanted his life to be, and that he wanted it to be with her, and with Noah, and with the broken bow, and whatever came next, which would be difficult and uncertain, and probably not smooth, because nothing about any of this had been smooth, and he had come to understand that the absence of smooth was not the absence of good. She was quiet for a moment. "You already asked me once," she said, "through a mail-order agency." "That was a transaction," she said. "This is different." "How is it different?" He thought about it. "That time I was looking for someone to fill a position. This time I'm asking you specifically. There's nobody else I'm asking." She looked at the dark yard, the barn, the fence line, the south pasture, where the new grass was coming in at the edges. She looked at all of it the way she had looked at it from outside the property, weeks before she ever set foot on it, when she was studying the problems of a ranch that belonged to a man who had not yet understood what was in front of him. "Yes," she said. The same word she had been saying in one form or another since she arrived. Yes to the working arrangement. Yes to the ledgers. Yes to the ride to Cheyenne. Yes to the evidence. Yes to Laramie. Yes in the way of a woman who had long since made her assessment of the situation and was simply waiting for the situation to arrive at the same conclusion she had. He took her hand, not beside it this time. Her hand, properly, and she did not pull it away, and they sat on the porch in the first warm night of summer, and the broken bow held them both. There are things that people say about love, that it arrives like weather, that it is recognized instantly, that it announces itself. Caleb Mercer's experience of it was nothing like that. It arrived the way the grass came back to the south pasture after the fire from the edges inward, quietly, without announcement, the kind of growth that you notice only after it has already happened. It grew in the space between a fence post explanation and a piece of dried apple. It grew in the space between a 2-day road and a certified survey, and a woman who refused to let her son's existence be used against her. It grew in the space of a porch in the dark and a small shoulder against an arm, and the word okay said by a nearly 6-year-old who had learned from the woman beside him now that the way you survive hard things is to face them directly and keep moving and trust that the ground will hold. The ground had held. Noah found out in the morning when they told him at breakfast. He was eating his porridge salted, not sweet, as he had always taken it, and he looked at them both and then back at his bowl and then back at them. So I can stay, he said. You can stay, Caleb said. Same words as the porch, weeks ago, but different now. Fuller Noah ate a spoonful of porridge. Okay, he said. Then can I still have my room? Yes, Evelyn said, her voice not quite steady. He went back to his porridge. After a moment he said, without looking up, I knew it would be okay. Did you, Caleb said? Mostly, Noah said. I wasn't completely sure. But mostly. He finished his breakfast and took his bowl to the wash basin and went to get his boots. Because there was work to do and the morning was wasting, which was the same thing Caleb would have done, and which was, in its small way, the most complete thing that had happened in months. The territorial prosecutor opened the formal investigation into Silas Crow's operation that autumn. The county land office clerk was suspended pending review. 2 of the ranchers who had taken Crow's money to sign the false affidavit came forward voluntarily once it became clear that the investigation was serious and cooperation was worth more than silence. Crow hired more lawyers and spent a difficult winter, as Hattie had predicted. And the following spring he sold 2 of his 3 northern properties in what the county record described as a voluntary sale, and which everyone in Silver Creek understood to be the beginning of a managed retreat by a man whose power had been built, on the assumption that no one would ever organize the evidence against him. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about Evelyn Hart specifically, which was a mistake that Caleb had some personal familiarity with, and which he did not take any particular satisfaction in noting, because satisfaction was not the point. The point was the water in the eastern creek running clear and uncontested. The point was the Broken Bow's books, which were not comfortable, but were honest and improving. The point was Ramon's voice on the road that winter, saying that 3 other ranchers had come to him with stories they had been keeping, and that the investigation had grown larger than any of them had anticipated, which meant that what Evelyn had built from a kitchen table in Wyoming had reached further than the Broken Bow's fence line. She had known it would, Caleb thought. That was why she had done it the way she did, not just his water claim, but the whole pattern. She had always been thinking about what was bigger than the immediate problem. She had arrived in Wyoming with $43 and a 5-year-old boy, and had seen, from the outside of a struggling ranch's fence line, the entire shape of what was wrong and what it would take to fix it. He had taken 2 months to figure out she was worth listening to. He had taken considerably longer to deserve her. Whether he deserved her now was a question he could not fully answer, and he had decided that was all right. The things worth having in a life are not generally the things you deserve. They are the things you show up for every morning and do the work of keeping, and try not to take for granted on the days when the work is hard and the results are uncertain and the ground feels less solid than you need it to be. He showed up every morning. The Broken Bow did not become a different kind of place after the hearing. The south pasture took the full season to recover. The north fence still needed sections replaced before winter. The cattle numbers had to be managed carefully through a dry stretch in late summer. There were mornings when the ledger was not encouraging, and evenings when the work had been hard enough that nobody had much to say, and nights when the problems cycled through in the dark in their familiar way. But there was a door at the end of the hall where a light went on in the mornings, and boots on the steps outside, and a boy who followed him from task to task, with his serious eyes and his accumulating competence and his habit of asking questions that straight to the practical heart of whatever needed understanding. There was a woman at his kitchen table every morning who saw the numbers clearly and told him the truth about them without managing it for his comfort, and who had never once, in all the months since a train platform in Silver Creek, let him pretend that easy was the same thing as good. Noah Mercer, he took the name in the spring, matter-of-factly, as he took most things, with the statement that it made sense logistically and that he had never been particularly attached to the other one anyway. Grew up on the Broken Bow, knowing something that most people spend their whole lives trying to learn, and many never do, that the family you choose is no less real than the one you were born into, and that a person who stands beside you when they are not required to is worth more than all the people who are simply there by accident of blood. He learned it by watching two imperfect people do the hard, unglamorous, daily work of choosing each other, over and over, in small ways and large ones, across kitchen tables and fence lines and difficult roads, without either of them ever pretending it was easy or inevitable or something other than what it was, a decision made again each morning, that the thing in front of them was worth the cost of staying. That is what the Broken Bow taught him. That is what he carried. There is a version of this story where the right choice is obvious from the beginning, where the man sees clearly and acts rightly, and nobody pays the price of a wrong decision made in fear in front of a crowd. That version is easier to tell. It is also not true to anything about how people actually work, how we make our worst choices when we are most afraid, how we confuse protection with wisdom, how we turn away from the things that could save us because they arrive in a form we did not anticipate. The true version is harder. It involves a 5-year-old boy on a bench, winding a thread around his finger, deciding not to cry. It involves a woman who could have chosen bitterness and chose forward motion instead, every single day, not because she was extraordinary, but because she understood that the alternative was to stop, and stopping was something she could not afford. It involves a man who was wrong and knew it, and spent the next year doing the slow, unglamorous work of getting himself right, not through a single dramatic moment of redemption, but through frost-heave explanations and midnight porridge and bent wire hinges, and showing up each morning, for the life that had arrived in a form he had not expected. The hardest thing Caleb Mercer ever did was not the fire, or the hearing, or the 11 years of building something from nothing. The hardest thing he did was stand on a train platform in April and make the wrong choice in public, and then spend every day afterward choosing differently, without the comfort of anyone telling him he had done enough. He had never been told he had done enough. He had simply kept going. In the end, that was what it came down to, not the grand gesture, not the perfect moment, not the version of himself he might have been if he had been braver from the start. Just the kept going. Just the morning after morning of a man and a woman and a boy and a struggling ranch and the daily, unspectacular, necessary work of becoming the family that none of them had been able to plan for and all of them had needed. The stick fence stood in the side yard for 2 years before the Wyoming weather finally took it. Noah built a better one the following spring from actual lumber, with a proper gate that swung on real hinges. He was 7 by then and took the work seriously and did it right. Caleb watched him do it and did not say anything because some things do not need to be said. But he thought about a bent piece of wire from the scrap pile, and a child's hands pressing it into a hinge, and a gate that opened, and all the things that had followed from the simple fact of a boy who decided, before anyone had given him reason to, that the gate should actually work.